Good evening, everyone. It's now 6:02, and I'd like to call to order the Sherwood Budget Committee for the May 19, 2016 meeting. Kathy Brucker, will you please call the roll?
Yes, sir. Chair Andy McConnell.
Here.
Vice Chair Mirta Mayer.
Here.
Susan Kloss.
Here.
Andy Jensen. Amy Kutsky.
She's on her way.
Okay.
Be late.
And then Paul Meyer, Paul Mayer, he's absent. Kurt Studer.
Here.
Mayor Clark.
Here.
Council President Harris.
Here.
Councilor Browse has stated she would be late. Councilor Henderson. Councilor King stated he would be absent. Councilor Kuiper.
Here.
Thank you. Councilor Robinson.
Here.
Thank you. I apologize.
That's okay.
So we barely have a quorum here. We have 9 out of 14 tonight, so we can proceed with the meeting, and the others will join, and we'll certainly have a quorum. Okay, wonderful. Let's begin. Before we continue with the review of departmental line item information, we will be talking about PERS. I want to make a couple of administrative notes before we begin. First off, please make sure your microphones are on so that this meeting can be recorded and you can be heard, and so that Jean can record any, fill in any gaps from what she's typing as we move along. Secondly, just as a note, if there are actions that we need city staff to go and research before we make any votes or motions, we need to make those requests of city tonight if we want to not guarantee that we wait for a fourth meeting. So those that haven't been on the budget committee before, if city needs to go and do some research before we do a vote, that means we need to come back and meet to do that vote, obviously. If we ask them to do that research by tonight, that means by third meeting, we can do the voting and approve and recommend to the council that we approve the budget. So without further ado, Councilor Henderson is here, just for the record. Mr. Gall, do you want to start with the PERS discussion?
Sure, Chair. I'm going to actually turn this over to Kathy pretty quickly. So we wanted to start, this is actually in response, I know there's lots of interest in PERS, and I've mentioned last week that next year we're going to see a significant increase in PERS. So Kathy's done some calculations to give you kind of a glimpse of what next year will look like in terms of PERS. And then we also want to address Susan's question about the number that's in the CAFR, the liability number, in what, if anything, we should be doing related to that. So that's where we're going to start. So you want to go ahead?
Yes. So you each have in front of you the estimate that was prepared for this. And if we could just kind of step through this a little bit so you can understand what my assumptions were on here. One thing, this, as I say, it is in fiscal year 17-18, next year, that we will actually be receiving these increases. It is issued every 2 years, so we're on the second year of the previous increase. So our 16-17 rates currently are 17.15%, 10.81%, and 14.92%. 17-18 rates are forecasted at 21.46% for tiers 1 and 2. OPSRP is at 13.26%, and the OPSRP PD is at 18.06%, and that is 17-18. So as far as an increase, as the percentage of increase, or not percentage of increase, but the percentage it will be going up, the net percentage going up, 4.31%, 2.45%, and 3.14%. Now, if you figure the percentage of increase on the current rate, that's where you see the bigger numbers of the 20.08, 18.48, and 17.39. But as I say, that's a percentage of the new rate into the old rate, the increase going up. City of Sherwood does take care of the 6% employee pickup. So in the calculation, of course, I pick that up also too. So the actual rates that will be calculated for 17-18 are running at 27.46, 19.26, and 24.46. 0.06.
Can I ask a question on that?
Yes.
The rate pickup that we pick up, the 6%, is, tell me exactly what that is?
That's the employee share.
So the city is picking up the employee share as well as the
Yes.
employer's share?
Yes,
And that's part of the bargaining agreement that we
Yes.
have?
yes. Okay. So coming down to the, based on the individual salaries for the 17-18 fiscal year, I keep emphasizing that is next year that you'll be looking at this. On an estimate of wages and salaries, roughly about 3% more than what you're looking at currently. On individual salaries, the total amount of PERS for 17-18 will be $1,705,218, or a $267,768 increase over the 16-17 budget that you're looking at right now, or a percentage increase of 18.63%. Now, we also carried it out into the 18-19 year. That will only go up based on a projected increase of salaries of 3%, because as I say, the rate is only adjusted every 2 years, okay? So the number of staff, as you see, for Tier 1 and 2, there's 36 staff members. OPSRP is at 71, and the OPSRP PD is at 12. So as staff retires, new people come on into the OPSRP rates, your net cost will go down because it is a lesser cost plan. The one thing also too, that as pulling out of our CAFR, if any of you want really detailed information on what our whole PERS plan is, the Comprehensive Annual Financial Report was substantially rewritten last year for all the changes with PERS. So it's a really good source. It's very detailed. It's very, really gets down in the weeds on the whole situation, but it is a good source of information for it. And excerpting from that part of it was that total payments that are made each year are based upon the PERS funding policy for monthly employer contributions. What you see us paying every single year, what we're forecasting at the $1,705,000, and that's at the actuarially determined rates. These contributions that are expressed as a percentage of covered payroll are intended to accumulate sufficient assets to pay benefits when due. So as the employees retire, that's the money that's accumulated to pay those actual retirement benefits. Now, these benefits are what constitute that net pension liability. So the $2 million that has been referred to, that's what that net pension liability consists of, is all the calculations for these employee benefits. And as discussed, it is truly a rolling target. It's reevaluated every 2 years by PERS, and it's based on the employee demographics at that time. It's really about all I have to say about it tonight. Are there any questions?
How far, the liability that we have right now is over 2 million. And do you think that we're going to substantially eat into that with the increase?
That is reevaluated every 2 years, Susan. The 2 million is not fixed in stone.
Right.
At all. In 2 more years, there will be a reevaluation of that. In fact, in the 17-18 year, prior with this coming up, we've just gotten the reevaluation for 14-15. So we'll have a new number that we'll be bringing into the 15-16 fiscal year ending statements. And out of that 14-15 reevaluation is where this number came from. So that net pension liability is going to be changing every 2 years. There's no doubt about it. So you can't really say it's not a fixed number that we're eating taking care of part of.
Right, but there's still the liability. What I'm saying is that it's 2 million now. Do we ever expect it to go down to zero, or are we?
No, it can't. It can't. It won't.
Right.
And
So-
the other thing, Susan, that I think we heard last week is that $267,000, that's real dollars.
Right.
That's going to hit our budget next year on top of our others. That number that you're concerned about, that liability which changes, we'll never cut a check to pay for that.
Right.
That's just the accumulated, and that's going to go up and down depending on how the system's working and what our employees are and stuff. It's never going to get to zero. So it's always going
So
to be
why
a
are they
liability.
recommending then, why is PERS recommending that each city and municipality start taking care of those deficits?
What they're recommending that you watch very closely is this annual required contribution amount. Because there was such an increase, a 4% increase in 1 year is quite substantial.
Right.
And they're recommending that you keep an eye on that and that you prepare and be ready to pay for that on an annual basis. There's some cities that are in far worse shape that are not able to take care of that in full. Sherwood fortunately is able to. They're looking at it, they're looking ahead. But that is what they're recommending, is keep an eye on that, the impending rates that are coming, and be aware of those and plan for those.
Okay, so are you saying that they aren't recommending that we try to do something to manage our liability other than whatever that net that they're going to increase to?
What they're recommending is that you look at that impending rate and plan for that.
So they're not concerned about our liability. They're not.
No, I wouldn't say that. They're concerned about the whole system. It's a whole system that is shared by over 900 employers. I really,
No, I know what you're,
yes.
see, I know what you're
Yes.
saying, okay? You guys are very rightly so worried about this budget and the next budget. What I'm saying is, if we have a long-term liability in the same way that we have long-term debt that we take care of, if we have a long-term liability that PERS is telling us, you've got to make sure you've got that covered, then we can cover that if we start planning for it. If we keep saying, oh, we can't really do anything because, it's going to change and it's not going to be 2 million, maybe it's going to be 1.5 million. And I'm not suggesting that we set the whole 2 million aside. I'm suggesting let's have a plan if we do have that liability that somehow we need to have that taken care of, that we do that. And this is spurred on by PERS coming through and trying to educate everybody over this past year. So I'm just saying, let's put a plan together. And if they're still saying, well, technically you only have to do minimum payments, is that what we want to do?
Councillor Kuipers, you had a question.
Yeah, I just had a clarifying question. Isn't it true that we've had PERS for a while now, so haven't we always carried some kind of a liability? So that 2 million is not new.
No, not
That
at
2
all.
million we've carried for 20 or 30 years,
It's
right?
just never been reported.
Yes. It's
Right, okay,
never
and it's
shown
that
on the
incremental,
statements.
that 267, that incremental that we need to be addressing,
Yes.
not necessarily something that cities have carried with them for
Yes.
years and years and years, correct?
The major change last year with the statements was that, governmental accounting standards required that you start putting it on your statement, on the government-wide statement. The liability's always been there.
Yeah, okay.
Absolutely.
Thanks.
It's never gone away. It's changes, as I say, every 2 years. It changes based on your demographics, on the assumptions that PERS uses, et cetera.
It just makes it a little confusing, because not only are you required to show it, but now we've got this large incremental increasing over the next 2 or 3
Yes.
years, so it's sort of like, it's a lot to get your head around, so thank you.
Very well put. Thank you.
Councillor Klaus. I'm sorry, Councillor, last name. Robinson, thank you. I'm reading name tags.
Two,
That's a problem.
I don't know where it is. Two questions. That total liability could potentially go way down if, for instance, everybody dies off and they don't have to start, pay what they're estimated to
That's
pay today, correct?
Yes. Interest
So-
rates go up, the liability will go down.
Okay. So my second question is, why is it different for 2018-19 than 17-18? That's where I'm confused, because you have tier 1, tier 2, 823 for next year, and then the following year, 848. I don't understand the difference. If the rate is the same for 2 years, why is it different in the second year?
In the long-term projections, we project out that salaries will increase an average of
Oh.
about 3% per year. So I
Okay.
factor that in.
Okay.
It's a great question. I had the same one. When she showed it to me, I'm like, why is this different? So,
And so the 267, the 51 would be in addition to the 267.
Yes.
say that again, Susan, I'm sorry.
The projection out for 18 and 19, the extra $51,000 is in addition to the
Correct.
267.
Yep.
So,
Yes.
Correct,
so we're looking at a fairly big number.
yes. Which is when we get to, if we get to a possible discussion about, well, why didn't you add the code enforcement officer? This is primarily the reason why I didn't add a code enforcement officer, because we have such a significant PERS increase next year that keeping or retaining any additional staff would be very challenging. This 267 is approximately what we see in a normal year increase in property taxes. So if our property tax revenue goes up, as it normally has in the last 4 or 5 years, which is about 250,000, that increase is gone and kind of totally eaten up by the PERS increase. And that's why I'm concerned, and you should be concerned about next year. Next year's budget will be a lot more difficult because of the PERS increase.
Should we be planning for that a little bit this year then? Keep a little bit extra aside?
Well, I think we'll get to that discussion.
Okay.
So hold that thought, so.
Great.
And this also gets back to retaining good financial reserves to kind of weather the storm, so.
Counselor Kuiper?
So just as an example, if we're collecting roughly $275,000 or whatever it is in property taxes for this coming year, that will be flattened out or made null and void, whatever, by the increase, the 267, it's different for every city, obviously.
Oh, yes.
Right? And so it could be that some cities are going to be a lot worse than, I say worse, it's a terrible term to use, but in a different position than Sherwood. Some might have not as much, the difference between collecting the property taxes and what that increase will be, and some will be more.
Correct.
Okay.
And generally, school districts are impacted more by these
Because they
increases.
spread much farther
I
beyond our boundaries, or
don't
what?
necessarily know why, but
If you remember during the PERS discussion that we had during that one budget committee, the work session, and one of the things that they mentioned in there was that so many school teachers are young women coming right out of school and getting hired on, work 30 years, and they're out. So they have very long retirement period.
Yeah.
And that, really extrapolates out on their rates and their total costs. And many of them are on tier 1. So that has
has an
really
impact.
factored into the schools.
I mean, that's why
Heavily.
that number on the bottom in terms of our current, the fact that we have 71 OSPERS, that's good. The higher that number is, the better in terms of our costs.
Yes. That is the police department observe rate. So you're either tier 1 or tier 2 as a police officer. Then if you came in after a certain date, you're observe, but it's a different rate than other staff members.
Other questions related to this? Hopefully it's a little bit,
Yeah.
Counselor Henderson?
Well, when I read the line that says number of staff in each individual, do you have people in multiple unions? Because this adds up to 119. We don't have 119
It is.
employees.
FTE.
I apologize. I did not check something, I'm not sure quite what that is, Counselor Henderson,
Okay.
as far as, I can check into that.
Okay.
And find out. I was basing it off of the, you know what that is? We have some part-time employees that are, if they're over 600 hours, they're eligible for
PERS.
PERS. And so that's what it factors into, some part-time employees. We may be at 115 as far as FTEs, but then if you break it down into, part of those 115 are
add those up.
part-time people, so it adds
Okay.
up. So we do have the 4 additional there.
All right, are there any other questions or comments on PERS? Seeing none, I'm sure we'll talk about it in terms of actions later. Mr. Gall, you want to move into the line item information?
Yep, we're gonna continue where we left off. We ended last week, I think we finished the admin section. So we're going to go into community development, and Julia is coming up, the community development director. So we are going to start with planning, which is on page 20 in the back of your book in your line item section. So unlike most of the departments in admin that didn't have any revenue, community development, the different sections of community development do bring in revenue. So you may have some questions on the revenue side that we are anticipating. So let's start with planning first. And if you look at the projected or the proposed 16-17 revenue numbers in planning, there is a pretty healthy decline. So 314,000 is being proposed in revenue as opposed to a projected 458 in this year. So Julia, do you want to talk about that a little bit?
Sure. The primary reason for that is actually grants. If you look under the miscellaneous intergovernmental, we're projecting $180,000 in grants. Some of that we thought we were going to get last year and we didn't and had it this year. So that's why it's so much more than our adopted budget. And we actually, while we have applied for many grants for, general fund things and planning, we actually haven't received any. That doesn't mean we're not going to continue applying, but we can't just, we're not going to assume in the budget that we got a grant that we don't know for sure. The actual charges for services, we're projecting an increase based on the development activity that we're seeing. But the decline in the revenue is really just grants.
And that 180, correct me if I'm wrong, was largely Sherwood West?
Yes.
Are there any active applications for grants out now? And if so, what would be anticipated?
There are none that we're waiting on, no.
Okay.
There are some that are going to be coming due that we will be applying for, and there's some related to the comprehensive plan update that we'll be applying for education and outreach and things like that, but we haven't put in for those yet.
So you're talking about that line item 4395?
Yes.
So the 180, we put that in there thinking we were going to get it. Is it something we are going to get? And it's a matter of timing, or is it?
That's
From last
actually
year.
projected for this current fiscal year that we're in right now. We actually believed when we put the budget together last year that we were only going to get 52,000. A lot of a prior grant that we thought we were going to get in previously didn't come in until this year. So we're actually projecting, we budgeted 52,000. We're actually going to bring in about 180,000 this year. Next year, we're projecting none.
And the 180 is the Sherwood West.
That's primarily what that number is. Let me just confirm that that is all of what that number is. Yes, okay.
Councilor Robinson.
I have a couple questions. Under 4535, planning DR other, what is that?
That's planning development review other, so that's going to be minor modifications. It's sort of a catch-all. Last year, we pulled out more things, so like major or Class A variances, things like that, but that's kind of the catch-all for everything else. There's, I believe, home occupations are in there. It's just sort of a variety of things that are in that development review other.
Okay, and then appeals.
Mhm.
What's an appeal that costs us money? Or no, that's revenue.
Right. right.
So what would be appealed, and is that
Any land use action, anything that goes to that's a staff
city
level decision.
council?
Right, so
Okay.
anything that would, if staff makes a decision, it's appealed to the planning commission, or planning commission makes a decision and it's appealed to the council. I believe that's only assuming one appeal. We actually haven't gotten any in recent years.
Okay.
So
Oh, that was my next question. And then under expenditures 6010, regular salaries and wages, does that include, does the 411 include a senior planner for the comp plan update?
Yes, my understanding is that what's in there is what we have put into our budget, which includes the senior planner for the comprehensive plan update.
Okay.
is that a normal, is that somebody that's already on staff?
It's not somebody that's already on staff. We, in the current budget, we have budgeted an associate planner to help us with Sherwood West and to begin comp plan update. That planner left and is no longer with us. So we will be going out for a senior planner position and hiring someone new.
And why are we doing senior planner versus associate planner?
Because of the level of work and knowledge needed, frankly, to do the comprehensive plan update. The person that we hired for Sherwood West was fantastic and was, I think, a very high-level associate planner. I don't think that we would necessarily get that quality of associate planner. So we really want to make sure that, especially since it's a limited duration, we want to make sure that we're getting someone that really is capable of taking on that project without a steep learning curve.
So how many FTEs do we have then?
In planning, we have, in the budget, so we have 3 planners, which includes the planning manager, and then a senior planner, and then a senior planner for the comprehensive plan update. We have an admin, the city hall receptionist, and then there's a portion of my time and then a CDD admin time that's split between the 3 departments in community development. So 5,
So what portion of your time goes to planning then?
it's about a third. It's a little bit more than a third, but. There are 5 FTE in planning, and I was talking to Joe about this, it's a little complicated because if you look at all of CDD, it's 15 and a half, but when you look at each department, I'm a little bit in planning, a little bit in engineering, and a little bit in building.
And then I have one final question for Joe.
Sure.
In prior discussion and discussions about wish lists, I guess, we've talked about changing code enforcement to a staff position. What department would that go into if we were to have it? A city employee, or not the police?
The wish list that we've been talking about in terms of put money aside, in terms of where that position would be in community development, not in police.
Okay.
And that's not reflected in here because it didn't make it into my proposed budget. What is reflected is a split of the current person that's doing code enforcement. In the past, it was always in the police department, 100% funded. We have split it now. So 50% of that time is in police, 50% of that salary is now in community development.
And where is it? What
It's part of
section
that, it's part of that regular salaries and wages, so
No, but
is-
is it in planning or building or?
Planning.
we put it in planning, didn't we? Yeah, it's in planning.
Okay.
So then that's one of the reasons why the increase is from 551
Correct.
to 606.
So if you turn the page to 21, if you look at the expense side of the equation, total expenditures in planning is slightly lower next year, 741 as opposed to 783 in the current year. Any other questions on the planning department?
Councillor Henderson. Don't worry, sir.
So, when we think about the potential for the amount of land that may come in, so your department has inspection, right?
CDD, yes. Mhm.
So we've got 61 homes coming in for D.R. Horton, 80 homes coming in over there on Mandel. I don't know how many would fit in the 60-acre we got from Brookman Road. Do you have enough staff? And obviously, that's not going to happen overnight, but, I mean, I just wonder about the volume that may be coming into your department, and maybe you're staffed appropriately, but I just want to at least ask the question, as far as customer service levels that that, might be acquired for pre-app meetings or just general, information requests that could be generated out of, 100+ acres of
Right.
land.
I don't know quite how to, sure, we could use more staff. If things come in, faster, stronger, Brookman comes in full force, it will be tight, and we'll have to determine, and one of the things that Joe and I and Tom had talked about is, one of the things that we look at is where are the revenues at in relation to what we projected, and if we're, our projections are based on a certain amount of growth and a certain, some assumptions. If things come in a lot stronger than we are projecting, then we'll have to talk as that happens and see if we need to make some course corrections.
In our conversations, actually, in the last week or so, I'm more concerned on the building. We haven't gotten the building. That's where I think I'm concerned about staying on top of stuff. Not that planning won't, but building and building inspections. We have one building official that does a lot of plan
aware of
review and inspections, and he's pretty stretched right now. And I think if we really got slammed all at once and he couldn't handle it, we would do a temporary contract. It would not be bringing on more staff, because this would be a temporary blip to really deal with the demand, and then things would come back down.
And that, especially in the building department, they are exceptionally lean. But they've also had to cut over the years as the economy declined, they had to cut back, and they were a much larger department, and they've cut back significantly. So I think they're very hesitant, even if things are picking up a little bit, to make ask for more staff, because you don't know necessarily that it's a long-term thing. And that's something that, we'll look at if more of, Brookman comes in and more of Brookman comes in, and there's things that are, further out on the horizon, then we'll need to talk more about whether or not, we have some permanent hires. But if things pick up more than we've projected, then we'll have to, talk about temporary or, on-call contracts with the county or something like that.
Vice Chair Meyer.
Well, along the same vein as Councilor Henderson's comment, and we talked a little bit last week about comprehensive planning for Sherwood, and I have the same question and major concern that given the pending development or the likely development, I'm really concerned that this budget is tight for your department especially. And I'm concerned about the impact that will have on, again, putting the comprehensive plan on the back burner. Can you share your thoughts on that? And Joe, I'd like your comments.
It is tight, and unfortunately, when you have an increase in current planning development, that takes precedence to a certain extent, because you've got the 120-day and you've got requirements, which is why we really need to have this senior planner that's dedicated to the comp plan really focus on that. We know that is a priority. We do have some money in the budget under the other professional and technical services for on-call planning if necessary. So if we really have a pickup in the current staffing just can't deal with those current planning projects, that's an option that we can talk about. And again, I think if we get to the point where these projects, the comprehensive plan amendment project, or the comprehensive plan update project, and the Cedar Creek Trail is another project that takes a lot of staff time. If those are suffering because of the amount of current planning projects, then we'll need to talk about bringing, having more on call or having some temporary assistance. We actually right now, while the associate planner that was helping with the Sherwood West concept plan isn't here, we're so busy that we actually have someone here in the office temporary. He's working a few hours a day just to kind of help us with some current planning projects, and that's helping quite a bit. So that's a possibility if that becomes an issue. So we know it's a priority. We know that's exceptionally important. We can't allow it to go on the back burner. So if it's looking like that's becoming a problem, then we're going to have a conversation.
Well, and the
and
other
again,
thing,
the revenues would be higher.
the revenues would be high, but the other point is by bringing on the limited duration senior planner, and saying your position, the reason we're hiring you on a limited duration is to lead the comp plan update and not give that individual current planning projects. And I mean, that we're going to have to be, she's going to have to manage that. And if current planning is starting to become stretched, then we are going to have to go out with, temporary help in planning and bring people in to address the temporary bump and keep that senior planner focused on the comp plan update.
Sometimes you have temporary employees or on-call. Usually people like to have longer term. I'm just wondering what that kind of quality.
Well, it depends on the
contracting-
person, obviously. We've done it several different ways. The person that is with us now is good. He's got a long history. He has another sort of completely separate job so he kind of enjoys and likes doing that part-time, nothing long-term, permanent projects. So that's working out fairly well right now. Other on-call projects we've actually had with firms, so planning firms, and so that, they've got high quality.
That's what I was
staff.
wondering.
Yeah.
Okay, thanks.
Councilor Robinson.
Okay, I want to go back to the code enforcement person.
Sure.
So this is a change from last year, and you're switching half of the current code enforcement person to half of their salary coming out of the community development department. And I presume in doing that that person is not going to be reporting to the director of CDD, but will still continue to report as a police officer.
Well, he's not a police officer.
Okay.
Jeff can respond to that. Jeff, do you want to come up?
Okay.
Come
He's
on
not
up
sworn,
because
but
this
he's under
impacts-
the direction of the
Yes.
chief,
Yes.
correct? So I don't understand putting it within the city's direction and keeping him in the same position, basically.
Well, he's going to be doing more code enforcement.
Okay,
He's going to have to do more code enforcement.
okay.
And
And
that's
what
what
does
we
that
will
look
work
like?
out. That's what we will work out between the chief, Julia, and I.
Okay,
So more of his time is going to have to go to code enforcement
okay,
under this scenario.
okay.
The non-police person.
Yes, the not sworn officer. Well, he's not an officer. Bill Collins.
Yeah.
So,
Okay,
and ultimately, Councilor Robinson, having that position solely in community development, reporting solely to the community development is the way to go. And take police out of it. But we couldn't afford that, in my opinion, based on the revenues we have. So we got to make what we are currently doing work better.
okay.
I wanted to go on the one-time expenditures that we're talking about. What is the value in hiring a PERS person for a year to do the comp plan update versus a contract person? Because there's a lot of contract agencies, and that's pretty basic, comp plan planning is, it's complicated, but it's a basic thing that a lot of planning firms do.
It's harder to get somebody to come in full-time and work for our community on a contract basis like that. It's certainly something we could explore further, but I would think it would be, a lot of firms aren't necessarily going to give up a full-time staff person for what we need them to do. So I guess that's the answer, and that's my answer to that question. We certainly could have more consultant time and money help us with that, but then we're actually paying more money. Consultants cost a lot of money, hourly. Tom looks like he wants to add something there.
Wouldn't it be an RFP?
Certainly, if we could, I guess what I want to add is, and Josh would chime in here as well, but the laws regarding contracting have changed fairly significantly, especially for the Affordable Health Care Act and for PERS as well. So if you're trying to bring on a contractor and they're primarily under the supervision of city staff, you're probably going to get hit with those charges anyway. You can't do what you were able to do in the past, and that's just bring on someone, pretend they were a contractor, and then really have them under the control of doing a project in the city. So if it's more generic, where it's more of a project and they're more under the control of a private firm doing the work, then you can certainly do that. But if we're trying to bring them on to do a project which is comp plan, very much related to the city, very much under Julia's supervision, I don't think that you can probably go out and contract under the current rules for those two programs. So.
There are a number of factors that are used to determine whether someone is an employee or an independent contractor. The agencies that oversee that have been cracking down a lot on people who have been labeled solely appropriately as an independent contractor. Lately, so it's become more difficult. And as Tom pointed out, the main factor is supervision, direction, and control. So if we're going to have somebody in the office full-time who's basically reporting to Julia and acting for direction, that sounds like it's going to be an employee.
Okay. Thank you, that's good to know.
And we certainly, like I said, could do an RFP, hire more consultants and less in-house staff, but I do think it would cost a lot of money, and then we'd still have to supervise them. We'd still have to manage that, and there's, we do a lot of, contracting with consultants, but we also end up doing a lot of staff work on the inside to support those projects.
So the on-call planning services that we do now, that's been completely affected by the new
It's
rulings
much
and-
smaller. I mean, it's a project, and we honestly don't do it that much because it does take a lot of work on the planning manager's part to, because these people don't know the community. They don't know the nuances of things. They don't know the nuances of the code. And so they can evaluate it from a purely technical standpoint and prepare a staff report. But there's still more. There's the noticing that you have to do. There's still a lot of things that has to be done. But the on-call is tens of hours, not hundreds of hours of work that's being done.
And Susan, the other thing I think we're piggybacking on our experience with Connie, who was the associate planner, who was in limited duration on Sherwood West, and that worked pretty well. And I think we learned a lot from that, and that's why we're heading in this direction. If we have someone that knows our community and is here all the time leading the project, that's going to be, we think, a better process than a firm that may loan us someone for a year or two.
Well, if you're going to get hit with PERS either way, then I absolutely see what you're saying.
So,
Yeah, and we have to evaluate each and every one of those positions individually as they come in because they're different. So.
All right, any more questions on planning? Yes, Mr. Studer.
So on line 6190, 1516 was 196, 196,000. And I noticed for 1617 that it's significantly lower to 110,000.
Right.
What,
That's
background?
that's tied to the grants as well. So with Sherwood West, we had a consultant do quite a bit of that work, and so we're not paying the consultant to do that work. There's also some associated with the Tannery EPA grant. So we have consultants for that. So we just have less consultant time. Obviously, we've still budgeted some money in for comp plan updates, some money in for the Tannery project, and some money in for the on-call, if we need them, planning assistance.
Okay. Anything else on planning? Next section.
all right, let's switch over to building. So building revenue, if you look at the bottom line there, we're doing better than projected. Or we're projecting 359, and we had an adopted revenue number of 304. So, and that's increasing next year as well, which is namely because Scott and his group building is very busy in town, and we anticipate and project that it will continue to be busy next fiscal year. That's on the revenue side.
And what projects does that include? Is that what Linda had mentioned, the D.R. Horton, the Mandel, and the Brookman?
I can tell you. So let me step back and explain how we project in community development, because it's a little challenging sometimes. Building is, you'd think, is a lot more known because they've gone through the planning process and we kind of know. But even then, you don't necessarily know 16 months out when you're preparing the budget what's coming in. What they are assuming is, and Ryder, this is just rough numbers, so you're going to say, well, there's going to be more residential dwellings there. He's projecting about 50 residential dwellings, the Springs Assisted Living Facility, the Sherwood Plaza Apartments, a shell building on Oregon Street, about 10 commercial tenant improvements, and some about 15 residential additions or alterations, and some miscellaneous permits. So that's what goes into those. Some of those may not happen. Some things may come in that we didn't even know about. I will say that at least in recent years, the building department has projected low and usually ends up having more than they anticipate. The other thing with building and engineering is their revenues are based on a percentage of the value, a percentage of the construction costs. And so not only are you having to think about what might come in, what are we pretty sure is going to come in, what do we think is going to come in. With planning, we can say, okay, that's this many applications, and this is what it is. So it's a little bit easier to be within the realm of a pretty good number with those. With engineering and building, you're also having to project, okay, what do we think that's going to be valued at? What do we think the square footage is going to be? So it gets a little harder. And building, in recent history, has tended to project on the lower end in terms of those values.
So if you look at the actual numbers, Julia, fiscal year 13-14, the 580, was that pretty much the Graymore project that
Yeah.
triggered that?
That was the big.
I do have a small question. I noticed there's a big bump in travel and training,
You caught that, and you didn't,
6450.
I bet you thought it was a typo.
Well, no.
So that is tied to the software. We actually put into the budget, and it got removed from the budget, $50,000 for essentially a reassessment and reimplementation of the Infor program. Infor started in the building department, and for whatever reason, the building department budget has not reinvested in upgrades and maintenance of that. And it's beginning to be a problem in terms of efficiency and best practices for accounting purposes and things like that. So we really do need to do an audit of that system and identify what specific upgrades we need. We also need to make sure staff is better trained so that they can run reports without taking a day to do it. And frankly, we have staff that are taking an entire day and then having to call Public Works because they're having troubles with the reporting. And so this will allow us to have the training that we need to better function within the system that we've got. And $10,000 is the estimate that was given to us to do, just because computer classes and training is not inexpensive. So that was the big bump, is it's 10,000 more than we budgeted for in prior years.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions? Councilor Capra.
How many FTEs?
The building department has 2.5 FTE, not including the portion of me and the portion of the community development admin. And that is exceptionally lean. And I just want to, that's the building official doing plans examination. He does residential plans examination reviews and inspections. We have a contract employee that does the bulk of the commercial plan review. And on occasion, like if the building official is gone for a week, we do have an agreement with Washington County that they can do inspections as well. But he actually tries to give people plenty of notice so that they don't even have to do that. So
It's a very lean building.
Yeah, that's pretty lean.
yeah.
Do we do contract? I mean, do we hire contract people to come in there to help them out?
We haven't needed to. I don't know, Tom, in your history as CDD, I don't think we've had to. They're able to function. I'm not quite sure how
Yeah, well, we certainly contract certain things like our plumbing inspections to Washington County. So some of those other things, we haven't needed to contract. We've looked at contracting potentially with other jurisdictions because we've been worried about a surge in service needs in the building department for a long time. And so that's something that we have considered and would do if necessary. And, you know, I think this is not a new message you're hearing. We've been kind of saying this year after year after year is at some point in time, we're probably going to have to come back with an additional request for additional services somewhere in order to do things, but we don't want to do that until it's necessary. And the good thing about building planning or engineering is there's going to be offsetting revenue to offset, you know, those costs for a period of time. So we want to be flexible, whether it's contracting with someone in the private sector or the public sector. Another agency would be our first, you know, desire to go to, and there's resources out there, but they get busy as well. So we just kind of have to deal with what we have, and we'll deal with what comes up as it comes.
And you guys, as the administrators for this department, agree with what their projections are. Basically, I mean, you don't think we're gonna get slammed in the middle of the cycle, or?
Well, it's always hard. They're pretty conservative in terms of building, because I'm always saying, you know, this will come in, and I'd rather them be conservative and deal with additional revenue and additional work versus planning for revenues that are unrealistic. These are pretty realistic numbers, in my opinion.
And I guess on the positive, we don't have that much residential land in the city left to develop, and that certainly takes a lot of the building inspection time. Brookman and how much of Brookman and how quickly Brookman comes on could be an issue. I'm thinking it's going to be probably more of an issue towards the next fiscal year, and so we'll have to take that into account in terms of impact of the building department and impact engineering, but we'll see.
Vice Chair Meyer, you had a question.
Yeah, you know, it just strikes me odd that the budget for personal services decreased, given you're already running so
Yeah, I
lean.
think, I actually was looking at that before the meeting. I believe that is a reflection of my time allocation. Roughly, it's about a third, but there's less of my time that goes to building, because I'm not going to building meetings, I'm going to planning-related meetings or engineering-related meetings.
So
And
it's just an issue of
that-
allocation.
Yes.
Okay.
I think
Councilor Robinson.
the other, just a second, the other issue that we'll deal with, and it's probably a number of years, when Tonkin comes into the city, the Tonkin employment area, and we get some fairly large, potentially large buildings that are much more complicated, like an Intel type building or some, you know, complicated building like that, that's going to be a new world for us in terms of handling that. But I think the answer there is, again, temporary contract help, not permanent staff. I know Hillsborough, in dealing with Intel, has hired a lot of additional help to deal just with Intel, to deal at Rondler Acres and that project and to help them, because the inspection requirements for a complicated building like that, we don't deal with that at all currently. And I see that issue being on the horizon as Tonkin develops. That could be 2, 3, 4 years from now,
And
but
the
that
good-
will impact us.
Yeah, definitely. And I think the good thing about something like that, or even something major in Brookman, is that those are complex. They take some time to get through the process. And so unless something happens tomorrow, you know,
Anticipate
we
it.
should have time to get through the bulk of the fiscal year and
Yep.
start preparing. That's not to say it's always perfect, but that's the hope.
Councilor Robinson.
Last year, I asked the question as to the lag time between notifying the city that you need an inspection versus the actual inspection. And I think you told me last year that it was only a day. Is that still the case?
Yeah, it is still.
So even though you're
very-
lean, we're getting out there in a very timely manner
Yes.
within a day's notice.
Yes.
Yes, and if we were not, if service levels were suffering and we weren't, my phone would be ringing. I'd be hearing from builders that, hey, we're not getting our inspections, things are slowing down, and I don't hear that.
Yeah, and in fact, it's usually same day. It's not even days. And Scott, I'll put a plug in, he does a great job of communicating with the on-site manager. And like, if he's going to be gone for a day, he lets them know well in advance so they can schedule their inspections before, or they can schedule their inspections after. So he's usually really aware of where they're at in the process and can kind of manage things with that in mind.
Counselor Henderson.
Well, I also wanted to give a plug. I don't know if any of you have seen, as you come down Sherwood Road, there's a sign that says Ancestry Brewery. It's a new, and my mutual friend of mine, her and her partner are starting that in Tualatin, and she said their greatest difficulty is working with the city and getting inspections scheduled and actually completed. And then, of course, if they have a discrepancy, then they have to fix it, and then they have to schedule the reinspection, which takes a lot longer than it should. So kudos to Scott and his department.
Anything else on the building department?
Well, I just have an overall question. So what exactly does the community development director do?
I manage the planning, building, and engineering departments. So trying to.
We have managers in each one of those departments. So you manage the managers?
I manage the managers, help coordinate, make sure that we're all talking and liaison to the council, to senior management. And then I also do a lot of the metro meetings, regional meetings, those kinds of things. And I have projects too. I'm managing the Tonkin employment area, not the Tonkin, well, I did that too, but the tannery project. So I kind of help manage things as well.
And you're underneath Tom?
My CDD is under the umbrella of the assistant city manager,
Yep.
among other things.
Any other?
Anything else? All right, so let's go to the third department in community development, which is engineering. So I'm going to ask the apparent question, Julia.
How many FTE?
No, not that apparent
what?
question. So look at the revenue
Oh, from this, yeah.
A lot less.
this year compared to what we anticipated. So
Well, and we talked a little bit about this at the last meeting. Some of it is projects that we thought were going to come in that didn't. Some of it's, values and construction costs that were perhaps overestimated. There's things, a lot of the things we thought were going to happen this year are actually going to happen, are looking like they're going to happen next year, next fiscal year, as well as some things that happened earlier, so, if you look at 14, 15, there's some things that happened. It just kind of, we don't know exactly when these when they're going to be submitting for their public improvement plans, and the way they are currently taking the money in for engineering, and we're actually going to talk about addressing this in the fee schedule update, is they goes through, they submit their public improvement plans for review and approval. It goes through the review and approval process, and when they're ready to be issued, then they pay both the plan review fee that already happened and the inspection fee. So it's a little bit of not reflecting the work that's gone into things. So one of the things that we're going to be doing is taking in, based on the construction cost estimate, the plan review fee in the fiscal year that they're actually doing the work in, and then the inspections in the year that, in theory, they would be doing the inspections in.
So you had the question earlier, what kind of projects are identified? What projects were identified to come up with the proposed numbers? next year.
Similar projects, actually. We get together and kind of and talk about what we think is going to be happening. So in this fiscal year, the Sherwood Plaza Apartments, the Mandel subdivision was included. There's a Springs manufacturing development that's fairly small. I believe the Springs Assisted Living Facility is included in there. There's a subdivision on 99 that we included and that we think will probably get through the engineering phase but not be hitting the building department phase.
So what happens with the irregular flow like that? We're still paying salaries, and if you look at the numbers, that's a pretty significant shortfall. What do we have, do our employees, do you have them doing something, or are they just waiting for
Oh,
something to
no,
come over the
they're
counter?
busy. I'm not, a lot of it is, there's a lot of stuff that's sort of subsidized in terms of the work that they're doing, in terms of erosion control inspections and addressing, and they're still doing a lot of that work. There just isn't the revenue to show that. As far as what do we do with the shortfall, one of the, I guess, the advantages of the Community Development Department and in some divisions, and based on the timing of things, some came in sooner than we thought, and so they have more money than we projected. Some come in later than we thought, and they have less money than projected. As a whole, as a department, we're actually pretty close to what we projected budget-wise last year. And so I expect that will continue to happen. If we're over in one division, one department, we would likely be over in another because of the timing of when things come in.
Thank you.
And overall, if you go back to the beginning of these sections, and it doesn't have a page number, I'm sorry, community development overall is down expenditure-wise in the proposed budget compared to this current year. So you have about 1.5 million in the 15-16 budget, and you're at 1.49 in the proposed. Again, you lump those all together, and that's,
Councilor Robinson.
What is the almost $50,000 increase in regular salaries and wages, 60-10?
I think that it's an allocation. So engineering is a little more unique than the other divisions too, because they also charge to capital projects. And so the difference that you're seeing here is more salaries charging to general fund and less towards other capital projects.
and that goes back to Susan's questions. What are these folks doing if the development applications aren't coming in? They're working on capital projects. They have other work that they do. They're just not waiting around for development applications to come in the door. So,
And how many FTEs are in engineering?
There are 6 FTE, and then of course there's the portion of me and the portion of the CDD admin.
Yep. Vice Chair Meyer.
Just a couple of comments for folks watching the meeting, and just reminders that under the budget detail, our staff has done an excellent job, so thank you, in reflecting highlights of the 15-16 fiscal year, and they have also outlined 16-17 goals, which I think will be really helpful in minimizing a lot of questions for upcoming projects and things that are being considered for fiscal year 16-17. And also in the appendix, the personnel FTE comparison has already been provided. So while I appreciate, the questions and the clarification, we already have the information. So I just.
Looking, it's page 89 for.
Yes,
Head
yes.
count.
And it is page 89. And right now, we are, Julia graciously just went through engineering, which is on page 56 under the budget detail. So as we continue to go forward in all of the departments, it might be helpful to kind of toggle back and forth between those areas and where we are. Just wanted to throw that out there.
Yep. Thank you. All right.
you ready to move to police?
Before we move to police, I do want to make an announcement that I should have made at the beginning of the meeting. There will be a section for public comment. later in the meeting. If you wish to speak, please fill out one of the testimony forms and submit them to the Finance Administrative Assistant. The committee chair will recognize those persons wishing to speak, and any questions should be addressed through the committee chair. When you come to the microphone, I'll leave the microphone instructions off for later. Thank you. On to police, please.
And what we'd like to do, especially when we take a break, if you can get them up so we know how many people want to speak tonight, so then we can make sure you actually end the discussion period and we can get to public comment.
Right. Thank
So.
you.
Okay, Chief, come on up. Sure.
Objections to a break? 5 minutes. Let's make it 6 minutes. Mr. Gall, let's resume with the line item information for the police.
So we're on page 26, Chair, which is the police department. And the police department actually does have some revenue. So Chief, can you highlight just briefly where your revenue, most of it's from the school district, it looks like.
Right, that's the 50% reimbursement for the SRO. And the rest of that is really just various different things, witness fees, subpoenas. We have background checks that we're asked to do, fingerprints, copies of reports. And then on 4990, when we sell surplus, get rid of some of our assets, then that goes into that line.
Okay. Any question on the revenue side? Okay, overall expenditures in the police department are proposed to be a reduction. If you look at the bottom of page 27. So 3.58 million in the 16-17 budget as opposed to 3.68 million in the 15-16 adopted.
Less computer expense this year.
So I have a couple questions.
Councilor Robinson.
So the number for this year includes in it a reduction of 50% of the code enforcement officer. Correct?
Correct.
Yet-
Yes.
Yet it's still higher than the projected for this year. And so does that include the patrol officer that we're recruiting for, that we haven't filled that position?
Yes, that number on 6010 would include all staff, all positions, authorized positions.
Okay.
And it's actually a small reduction from what's budgeted.
Well, what's the difference
So-
in the actual? Do you know? Between the
Probably salary savings, right?
967 to the 926?
Yeah, it's probably salary savings primarily from
And then-
vacancies.
I continue to have the same question about why is it that we cannot get this overtime number down below 85,000? I realize that they get paid for doing all the festivals and things, but isn't there any way we can get that number down?
Chief, can you talk a little bit about
Well,
what
the-
overtime
our
is?
three
So-
biggest, the three biggest expenditures of overtime, by a pretty good margin, are shift coverage when someone calls in sick, or something happens when you have to fill a shift, court, and I had three when I started. So those are the two biggest. And then, but we do use overtime for some special events, but not all of them. A lot of them are covered by the officers that are on duty. But some of the bigger ones, we'll have portions of shift that will pay overtime to have folks there. So I agree with you. I'd love for that to go down, but we would, we haven't been able to do it. So, I mean, as you look at the history, it's been fairly consistent. We were down at 75,000 in 12 and 13, but otherwise it's been right around that same amount.
I guess, wouldn't it be less if we actually fill that spot for the position we're recruiting for?
Well, it would be easy to say yes, but because there's other categories, I would think it'd probably have some impact on it. I just don't know how big of an impact. Court varies, but court, like I said, is a big consumer of overtime. It's one of our two biggest. So, and we work with the courts as well to try to eliminate officers getting subpoenaed and turning around and coming home, or standby time, or those kinds of things. But to a great extent, that's out of our control.
So isn't it the case when you get subpoenaed, you get like $160 minimum with a subpoena for court?
Well, there's in the contract, there's a minimum callback, but I couldn't tell you it's $160. That would depend on the officer and what their rate of pay is.
Okay, I think it's statutory for subpoenas, because I do it all the time.
Oh, not for our officers.
Really?
No. So if
I was
they're
gonna
on
say-
duty and they have a subpoena, they just go while they're on duty. If the time for the appearance time for the subpoena falls during their off-duty time, they're going to get some kind of a minimum callback, but they're not going to get any kind of witness fees or anything. So on the civil side, they may get a check from the requesting attorney, the one that subpoenaed them, but those get turned over to the city, and the contract, then language in the contract prevails just as it would in a criminal case.
So is that, those subpoena fees reflected, since it's a good chunk of this 85, is that subpoena fee then considered a revenue up here somewhere?
4349 is where subpoena fees and witness fees go.
Other state revenue?
Yes,
And there's not a lot there.
and you can see it's not much. Because our court is 99% criminal. It's rare that an officer will get subpoenaed in a civil
Okay.
case.
Chair?
Counselor Henderson.
I'll give an example. 2 years ago, September, I was subpoenaed for jury duty, and ironically got chosen for a Sherwood DUI case. And then I'm seated in the jury box. But prior to going into court, as I pass, there were 3 of our finest sitting on a wood pew. And that trial went from 9 to 3. None of them were testified. And then that person took a plea and pled out. But they sat there for 6 hours waiting for somebody to call them in because it was a DUI resisting arrest. But they were there for 6 hours. And then one of them went home, slept for 2 hours, took a shower, and went to work. That happens a lot, believe it or not. So that's an example, and I don't think the officers have any control when they can leave. They have to wait for the trial to be over.
And it is a relatively small percentage, 4.2% of just the salary, 2.6% of the total.
Of the entire budget.
Yeah,
Yeah.
of just the salary.
That number is large, but just as a point of comparison, when I was in Fairview, which is a smaller police department, that was our overtime budget, about $80,000 a year.
All right.
So
There was also reference to, under the fleet section, and I'm not finding it real quick, to purchase 2 new vehicles, is that correct?
Yeah, that's managed. We moved, either last year or the year before last, we moved all fleet under Craig's budget in Public Works. So,
Oh.
because they manage the fleet for the entire city. So that's all been consolidated. And so they have the replacement schedules for that. And quite frankly, I couldn't tell you
What it is?
what it is right now. But I'm sure Craig would know because it's on in his
Okay.
bookwork.
Do you need 2 new vehicles?
Again, it's likely. I'd have to look at the mileage and look at the replacement schedule.
When we get to fleet, we can talk about that. That's a good question.
And what are your FTEs?
We're authorized at well, it was 26. I suspect it's 25.5 now.
No, we don't budget that. We're not allocating that way, Jeff. We're not. Can you explain how you changed the?
We have, yeah, we've got 26
You still
staff,
have 26.
26, and that one code enforcement officer or person, 50% will be charged to planning. There's 26 bodies.
So there you go, 26.
Yes, Mayor Clark.
So, under the other business, meals and expenses, 453, went from 1,200 to 3,000. What was because we were kind of clipping along at the same pace. And then,
Yeah, we were. What we discovered was that we needed to make a modification on what got charged to training and what got charged to business meals based on IRS rules. So a lot of things that I thought would fall under the training category didn't meet the IRS definition. And so when I got that, I sat down with Brenda and got a lesson on that. So I had to reallocate a little bit more to cover some of those things.
Yeah, but then your training budget went from 10,000 to 20,000 too. You would expect that to go down with your explanation.
Well, the reason that went up is I would have you look at the full history there. So in 12-13, we were at 19.5, and then we had a significant history of cutting back. And quite frankly, that was just because we needed to cut back on our budget during some tough budget cycles. And then in last year, I cut back to the lowest level because we were working to find funding for that position. And so that's where it got to 10,000. And that's, as you can see, it's projected at 15,000. So we weren't able to hit that 10,000, which is what I was afraid of. But we've also added some things in. We've raised our per officer training amount this year because we had the ability to do that. We added a conference that had been cut out since 2010. So that's a couple things that caused the increase as well.
Any other major items? Yes, Mr. Studer?
So you've been recruiting for a new officer since the beginning of this budget year, is that correct, or?
It was a few months after the budget, but yes.
Okay, so I'm seeing a trend where recruiting is becoming more and more difficult with the city of Portland. They're really struggling. Are you finding it difficult to find qualified applicants, or?
We are now. This last recruitment, we just exhausted the entire list and had to restart. That was the first time that we experienced it. And it's been a problem across the state for the last several years. And it's been discussed and analyzed, and we have been fortunate, but it caught up with us this last time.
Other questions on police?
Seeing none.
I
Oh, there are two.
just noticed
Councilor Harris.
overall a general increase in supplies. Pretty much all the categories have gone up a little bit, not some a lot, not so much others.
Counselor, which line item are you looking at in particular?
6505 through 6570. It's not
Yeah.
huge, but I'm just wondering if there's something coming that's making
So-
supplies in general go up, or just more pencils needed?
Yeah,
or-
there's a couple things there. So I'm just going to go in numerical order. The first increase is, well, it's not an increase, but training supplies and firearms and supplies. So those areas cover anything we need for training, whether it be taser cartridges or new tasers or ammunition to train with the firearms. And ammunition, it actually started a couple years ago, but we were hoping that the trend would change, and it hasn't. It's become increasingly more expensive. And so, it's not something that we have the ability to do anything about. I mean, we have to buy a certain amount of ammo every year to do our training, and so we have to pay the increased cost there.
Okay.
6530, uniform replacement and cleaning. We have a rash of ballistic vests that need to be replaced this year, and so we budgeted for those.
Big one right there.
The good news is they've reinstituted the bulletproof vest grant program, so we should be able to take advantage of that. But we're working to establish a much better replacement schedule for our vests. But unfortunately, there was a large number of them that were bought at once, and they have a warranty period, and so they all go bad at the same time, and it really creates kind of a headache. So we're going to kind of, over the next couple of years, spread that out and replace some maybe a year or two early, and so that the impact on the budget is spread out a little bit more. But that's the reason in uniform replacement and cleaning.
Okay.
Then in program supplies, I put a little extra in there for the community academy.
Mayor Clark, I think you had the next comment? Or were you, okay. Sorry, you were bringing it to my attention.
Yes.
Thanks. Any other
Man.
questions?
Okay, we're going to switch to the Community Services Division, which has a number, thanks Chief, a number of departments, and we're going to begin with the library. So this may be a tag team between Christian Schweitzer, who is the Community Services Director and oversees all these departments, but for Library Director, Adrian is here as well. And library is one of the departments that you may have noticed that has seen a significant, or is being proposed to have a significant increase next year. But let's look at the revenue first. And that's part of your reason. So we have an adopted 15-16 budget of $820,000 in revenue, and we're proposing an increase to 885, almost 886 next year, which is largely, correct me if I'm wrong, the increase in the county levy, correct?
Correct. You want me to just take it from there and
Well, I'm
expand
just,
on
yeah,
that?
and I don't know if people have questions on the revenue side. I want to make sure that you haven't seen the breakdown like this in the past, so.
I see no questions on revenue. Oh, Councilor Henderson.
What's the percentage distribution between the levy and the city?
The funding we get from Washington County Cooperative Library Services, when you include city administrative overhead, total distribution is 64% from the county. The remainder, nearly all of the remainder is from the city. Of that 64%, 1/3 of it is from the levy. So you'll remember this last November, there was an election. It was for another 5-year levy. That levy is a replacement levy. So the 1/3 portion is actually going to be a little bit more next fiscal year when it goes into effect.
Oh, okay.
That levy is a 5-year levy, and something to note too is that the distribution from the county to the city of Sherwood and all the other cities in the county includes a 3% increase every year of that 5 years.
3%?
Yes.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Revenue? Okay, moving on. Expenditures?
So bottom line, if you look at the total expenditure line, we're at 919 in the current adopted year's budget, and we go to 998. And besides the additional staff that we've highlighted that Adrian can talk about if you have questions, the total supply line, I see a trend, Councilor Harris. I don't know if you want to talk about that supply line and where you're spending more money, yes.
Sure. So I guess in order to talk about supplies, I mean, most of what we're doing at the library with the increased money coming in from the levy is going into personnel. A very small part of that increase is going into supplies, mainly line 6513, which is library supply pre-processing. That's a new fund code for us. In the past, we had some pre-processing funds that were put into 6519, the line right below. But mainly what this is a new service for us. We have a vendor which we purchase our books from, and that vendor can do added pre-processing so that when the books arrive, they're all ready to put on the shelves. We just do a quick double check and shelve them. The point in that for us is to move things out more quickly so that they get to the patrons faster, and to solve a workflow issue for us because we don't have very much staff workroom space to accommodate all the books that we are budgeted to purchase. Sorry. Do you want me to repeat any of that? No. Okay.
Any other questions on the library budget?
Councilor Robinson.
Why is it that you need another half-time position?
So the part-time youth services librarian position is a position largely to provide story times, as well as other services such as reference and reader's advisory and other programming for school-aged children. The story times have been a contracted service, and the position will allow us to bring that service in-house. So you can see that under 6190, or excuse me, oops, I'm looking at fuel cost.
6186.
Thank you. 6186 is library services. So that fund has been zeroed out for next fiscal year, and then it's being rolled into the position under 6010.
So what is the cost of that half-time position?
That position, the actual
that
FTE
original
doesn't show
memo.
up on my spreadsheet.
38 or?
She has it from last week's summary memo.
Do you have any other questions while we wait for that number? I guess I shouldn't be facilitating, but I mean, related to the position.
I'm curious what the attendance is at the story time.
We have 5 story times a week. We have 2 toddler story times, 2 preschool story times, and 1 baby story time. The toddler story times
somewhere.
can be between 60 and 85 people, the children and the adults. The preschool can be about half of that usually, and the baby time it's much smaller. That's more like on a busy day for baby time, that may be 12 babies and parents.
So we do plan to add one at the story time in the new
Yes,
position.
yes, thank you. So in the next fiscal year, if this budget is approved, then we would add a new story time called Fun for Ones. So currently, toddler time is for ages 2 to about 4. And what we're finding is that, or I should say 18 months to about 4 years old, and then preschool overlaps with that, about 3 to 5 years old. The youngest toddlers who are just starting to walk, currently with the toddler times, it's so crowded that the youngest toddlers get kind of run over by the older toddlers, and they feel more shy and they want to be next to mom or dad. And so we want to add the Fun for Ones, which is just for that 18-month to about age 2, 2.5, where they're just starting to step away from mom or dad. The Fun for One, so totally, all of our story times altogether, we have 5, we would have 6.
Each one is one time a week. They may be
Yeah,
offered
yeah.
more than once, but
Right, so it's currently
total of
2
5 programs,
two
not
toddler
6.
times. It's currently 2 preschool times and 1 baby time, and it would be the same, all of that plus the Fun for Ones.
Councilor Harris.
And is it somewhat kind of assumed that this position is being paid for with levy money?
Correct. Yeah.
We wouldn't want to spend that on something else.
Right. The city of Sherwood and Washington County libraries have an intergovernmental agreement about how that Washington County support money can be spent.
Okay.
It couldn't be moved to police or planning or anything like that.
Councilor Robinson, she's pulling up that information for you. So we can get you an exact number.
Vice Chair Mirda.
So I just have a quick question on line item 6702. What office equipment are you proposing?
Yes, that is primarily expanding our cubicles. Our staff space right now is, we're overflowing, and we don't have storage space. And if we get this position, we also need to add a
that makes
desk.
sense.
And then it's also adding a few sit-to-stand workstations, so for ergonomics.
Okay.
Councilor Henderson.
I have a question for Kathy, even though I think she's busy with.
That's like, I know the answer is about $35,000, but
We
I
had
wanna get
originally
that.
estimated 35, but I know you fine-tuned that.
I was just wondering, how is the TriMet tax allocated by department?
It is an expenditure of the department. It's based on the payroll percentage.
Payroll
Based on
percentage?
salaries percentage.
Okay.
And,
So the higher your payroll, the higher your TriMet tax? And is that, what's the estimated increase in that for
for the.
TriMet?
I don't believe there was an estimate in there. If there was, it was very, very small.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Yes, Mr. Studer.
So this question is for Kathy or Joe. I'm noticing with, in the life insurance, in all budgets, there's seems to be a small decrease for 16, 17 versus 15, 16 projected. But if you add that all up, it looks like it could be significant. Was there a change in contract or?
So are you looking at 60/54 life insurance?
Yes.
Tom, is that something related to our insurance?
Offset by the health insurance.
It's not health insurance, though. It's strictly life, so.
Yeah, I'd want to look at that and get back to you. I think I know what it is, but I don't want to just
Okay.
answer off the cuff. I think there was an adjustment in the allocation between what the city was paying and what employees were paying. So, but let me look into that, get back to you.
The youth services librarian position annually would be $31,472. Yeah.
Okay, sorry that took so long.
So, Councilor, Mayor Clark.
Adrian, I just had a quick question. So on that proposed addition of staff, would that person do then more than the story time?
Yes. Yes.
So what were they going to do?
So currently, we have one dedicated youth services librarian. That position is full-time, and that person does a number of programs for all ages 0 through 17. When we hire the new person, if this budget is approved, then the current librarian and the new librarian would redistribute the programs for all ages 0 to 17. Probably it would look like each of them is doing 2 to 3 of the story times a piece, and then also sharing the school age programs. And then the person would also work at the information desk and help going out to schools and talking about library programs and helping to purchase books, things like that.
Certainly more than what we're getting out of the contract position that's just doing story time.
Yeah. One of the goals there is that we want the youngest members of this community to connect with the staff person, the librarian, and then when they go into the library, they see that same person, and they say, oh, this is someone I can ask questions of, and vice versa, that they might see that person out in the community or in the library and get invited to story times and sort of build those connections.
Councilor Robinson.
So, my reading of your budget is that you have an increase of $60,000 for this year, but you have an increase of $79,000. So what are we including in the budget over and above the 60 that is costing us the 19,000? Is that the new services for the pre-processing?
I'm not sure that I'm following exactly which lines, but I think, are you comparing the current projected numbers to next year's proposed numbers and wondering why it doesn't look like it's as much as it should be?
I'm looking at the adopted budget last year compared to the proposed for this year. And it's 820 versus 885. That's $60,000 difference. And then the adopted budget 919 versus the 998 is 79,000. And I'm trying to figure out if the half person is only $30,000, what else are we spending that increase in revenue on that goes over by another 19,000?
Right. So we have some additional funds, besides the part-time youth services librarian, there's one library assistant 2 position, which is sort of a lead worker for the front desk. That's going from 32 hours to 40 hours, so it's a 0.8 FTE increase. And then we,
20,000 in supplies.
in supplies, it's 20,000. The breakdown there, besides the well, most of that is the library supplies pre-processing. Some of that is the book stock, about $4,000 in books, and some of that is in program supplies, about a little less than 3,000. And then the office equipment. That adds up to everything. And then there would be just the general increase in cost of staff.
Any other questions on library? Counselor Henderson?
Go ahead, Joe, if you.
No, I was going to move forward, and then you
Okay.
raised your hand, so
So
sorry.
if we look at 6010 in library, you've got an increase. So that's your part-time librarian, right? And that's step increases. You may or may not have a promotion included, right?
I don't know about myself personally, but the step increases,
okay, I meant in your
step increases for
department.
everybody.
Yeah, that's a
right.
Christian question.
Yeah.
But in your department, you might have a promotion or an anniversary
Step
date, right?
increases.
Right,
So-
step
so-
increases almost always happen every year.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And then the addition of the other 31.
0.7 total. Yeah.
Right.
0.2 and 0.5, yeah.
Right. Okay. Just clarifying. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Let's move
Okay,
forward.
now I was going to move on to the field house, which I think Kristen is going to cover.
Yes.
Declined a promotion.
What's that?
She said I declined a promotion.
Thank you.
She left the door open.
So Kristen, this is largely, correct me if I'm wrong, the field house over at the Public Works Building, correct?
That's correct. That's all that it is. We used to have the field house and sports recreation combined, but we split that out last year. So this is purely the field house. Not a lot of significant changes.
A small increase in revenue.
Yes.
3,500.
And you'll notice, I'm sorry, that
Less lost.
oftentimes leagues and facility rentals, they kind of flip-flop. If we have a lot of leagues in there, we don't rent the facility as much. If we have a lot of rentals in there, then that's because we're not having as many leagues. So the total revenue brought in stays fairly consistent, but it moves around a little bit where we gather it from.
So I have a hole punch in that lost line. So what is it? 9,000?
You know,
Sorry, which one?
It's punched out the
You know,
loss.
just the,
Oh, on the backside?
it's 9,000 something, and then I can't read the rest. 'cause-
93.55.
I'm sorry, Kathy?
93.55.
93.55.
And I'm assuming that it goes from being an income center to a living center because it was split out. Is that the number time you split the field house from, what was the other?
When we had recreation and other events tied to it. I think
Sorry.
the biggest reason, we looked at this a lot because we haven't really increased our materials and services, and we haven't increased the staff, but people have received step increases and PERS and everything else, and so the cost of having the staff has just crept up. So if you look at when it was only costing us $103,000 a year to staff it versus now we're at $124,000. That's making up the difference where we hit that point where we were breaking even, but the cost of doing business has continued to rise, and we haven't increased our revenues at the same percentage as the cost of doing business.
Counselor, one of the things I asked Kirsten to do, I think we need to look at our league fees. We may be a little low in terms of competition. We might want to, we have to be careful there that we don't raise them too high, that we start losing business, but that's something we're going to look at.
And you'll see that in the proposed fee schedule, we did put in for a $50 increase, which is very small, and we're still below what many other facilities are asking, nearly everybody. We don't want to increase it too much, because that's part of why we draw on the people that we do, so it's kind of a fine balance. But we figured a $50 increase, split amongst 10 people is doable. So you'll see that at council, small increase there.
Councillor Henderson.
Your current, your proposed FTE, which is not going to change, but what is it?
We right now have about 1.5
1.5,
FTEs.
okay.
So Dennis is full-time over there, and then about half of Lance's time is charged there. A little bit less than half.
Councillor Meyer, Vice Chair Meyer.
Just a question on the repair and maintenance of the building. It seems quite low. And I'm wondering, so for the current fiscal year, we're only anticipating spending about $250. Is that adequate?
Well, a lot of our major repair and maintenance is handled through the Public Works Department,
So then
and they
that's
take
another
great care of us.
allocation.
So this
Yeah.
is just above and beyond. If there's something that we need to do, that's a smaller amount, obviously. One of the things that we like to do is have people come in and do a deep cleaning of the walls because they get all scuffed up, or do an extra cleaning of the turf or something. So it's minor repair and replacement.
I have a part 2 question, if that's okay, Chair. So my part 2 question is the field house has turf.
Correct.
Is there the possibility of an alternate hard surface to potentially increase revenue for other type of activities within the field house?
There's floors that you could buy that lay on top of the turf.
Right.
And I remember back when the field house opened, we looked at that and said, well, what if we had mini golf in there? Or what if we did something else
Deck
with it?
hockey or whatever.
Right. And you
Okay,
can
hockey
do
mom.
that. You need to obviously be able to pay for it and store it and all of that. And I remember we even looked at some of the cost. The issue becomes it is used, summer's slower. Summer's slower because everyone's going outside to play. But during the fall, winter, spring, it's used on a daily basis. And so there's not, except for in the summer, those weeks or a month where it's not being utilized. Even in some of the off seasons, we do have softball and baseball come in and practice in there, and we have lacrosse come in there, and it's not just soccer. We have preschool play in there several times a week, and we'll have 40, 50 kids show up. And not that they couldn't play on a hard surface, but the soft surface works great for that.
It would just,
it's
I mean,
possible.
my comment is solely based on it would appear it may be an underutilized area, and there may be more potential revenue.
Sure.
That's it.
Thank you.
Yes, Councillor Ross.
I have a question that's not specifically about this particular budget, but in general, in light of the Department of Labor changes in the salary structure that's going to launch December 1 of 2016, how is that going to affect the city budget, if at all?
Well, that's for salaried employees only, and we actually only have one person that would fall under the new standards, and so we'll have to make an adjustment there, but it'll be a fairly small adjustment.
Is that already in here?
I don't know if it's particularly in here in the budget, but it's not a significant amount of money. So.
Yes, Mr. Stewart.
So what's the useful life of the turf right now, and whose budget would that fall under upon the time of replacement?
Well, the good news is we just replaced it earlier this year. So it's brand new, and the useful life is about 10 to 12 years. Being indoors, this one lasts a little bit longer, or can last a little bit longer. We have a turf replacement fund where some of the money that is brought in gets set aside. And then Craig also budgets some money based on the maintenance and replacement fund. So we project out 10, 20 years on what's going to need to be done. We don't collect enough fees to be able to replace it. We talked about that once, and the fees would have to be extremely high in order for us to be able to cover that through fees.
And Craig, where did we pay for that turf? What fund did we? General construction? Okay. Which we haven't gotten to yet.
How much was it? Craig, do you recall? Good deal.
Wow.
85,000.
Very good. It's a good deal. That's a good deal.
That's a good deal.
One
It's
last
easier
question.
inside again because you don't have ground that's sinking and trying to level it and do all of that. So, yeah. Right,
Compared to like Snyder?
right.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's why I'm saying, oh, it's a good deal.
Compared to 400,000.
You had a follow-up?
That was it.
Right.
Right, any other questions?
Okay, let's move on. The next page on 32 is it's called the community center, which is really the arts.
The Arts Center, and Maggie's going to come up and join us. Maggie Chapin is the manager over at the Cultural Arts Center. I'm very tall.
I know, I'm really tall. I kind of want to do that again.
So if we look at the revenue, the elephant in the room, line 4905, you see no revenue, no rent of buildings. That's the still to be leased space, 3,000 square feet at the Arts Center. So,
I will point out, if I may, that the rest of our revenue projections, Maggie did an excellent job. This was our first year of operations, and it's very hard to predict how things are going to go. And though the lease space did not go as we had hoped and has not been leased out, the rest of our revenues came in right at, if not a little bit over, which I think is nothing short of a miracle.
yes.
Because we're like, well,
It speaks to how much Sherwood really wanted this building.
Yeah.
He's using it, I think, is really the truth of it.
And to go back to the lease space, we are negotiating with two different businesses in town right now. They're at different stages. One is further ahead. They're both restaurants, and we're hoping that one of them will be finalized soon. So,
So if we had that space leased, what revenue would it bring in, given what it's being currently advertised at?
It's projected at that
58.
58,000.
All three spaces?
mm-hmm.
when we came up with that projection, that wasn't based on 100% occupancy, which is probably still pretty accurate. We based it on a little bit less than that, and not knowing if we would necessarily lease all three spaces, and we've just brought that forward since here we are in May, and it seems unlikely that we'll have someone up and going by July.
That's correct.
And that includes tenant improvements, that price? or
That
no?
does not, this does not include tenant improvements.
It's
This
just
is
rent.
just
Sorry,
purely
right, yeah.
revenue for.
After tenant improvements, I should say.
Counselor Browse?
So may I ask how much space these two entities are looking to potentially
The whole
lease?
3,000.
The whole 3,000?
So
Okay.
either of them that we're working with, that Tom's primarily working with, are interested in leasing the entire space. which in some ways makes it a lot easier than dealing with 3 different businesses for 1,000 square foot each. So we're cautiously optimistic.
Councilor Robinson.
On 6010, I noticed there's a $10,000 increase. What is that attributed to?
I believe it's just standard salary step increases.
Oh, okay.
There's no new staff projected
Okay.
that we're proposing to bring
Correct.
on, but everyone that we have there is new employees, so they're still receiving step increases. And with it being the first year, some of them, you get a step increase after 6 months and then another one after a year or so.
And so last year
Probably
it was a big deal to add a half a person for you. Are you finding it's adequate?
Yes, it's incredibly useful, and she's being used a lot.
Okay.
So, yeah.
I also had a question about what is the other professional and technical service?
Right.
And why has it gone from 18.5 to 36.3?
What line, Counselor, if I may ask?
6190.
6190?
Right, so that is broken down in a bunch of different categories. First category is our programs and series. So that's standing about the same at a $12,000 allocation from what we had this year. And then I have budget allocations for outreach events. So that's our art walk, which has increased this year. We have more happening there. We have gallery openings as well. And then there's also allocations for our education, for our teachers. And that allocation, I have it written down as 13.5. That is actually directly correlated to a revenue line for class fees, because we work with our instructors on a contract basis. So they get a percentage of the revenue from those class fees. So as that revenue line 4554 goes up, that technical fees goes up as well. So if we reduce that revenue line, that technical and professional services line will go down as well. So they're directly correlated.
So-
I'm sorry.
I was just going to say, so we basically have to budget that every class that we offer is going to go, and we're going to pay the maximum amount to our instructors and have 8 people in it, when in reality, that's not really what's probably going to happen. But that's how we have to budget so that we can cover those
So it could
fees
go
when they
up
come
or
in.
down.
Mhm.
I have, I've got it fairly conservative, hopeful spot there. And then also, I also have around $4,000 for technician services, and that is for sound and light technicians that work on rentals. And that is also directly related to revenue in the 4553 line. So when we have a rental, we charge the rental for technician fees, and that's directly correlated, so. So that's really, it's about heightened use of the center.
Okay.
Councilor Henderson.
So would it be fair when we look at, to say in 4905, that if the facility was rented, what I remember estimates were about 90 to 100,000 a year in rental revenue? But that was like 3 different, there are 3 doors, because we thought.
Yeah. I guess I don't know where that estimate came from or what time frame we were talking about, but that doesn't seem realistic with the lease prices that we're seeing in Old Town. For 3,000 square feet, you're looking roughly 18, maybe 20, maybe pushing 20 dollars a square foot, and that's not going to generate $100,000 of income. So I don't know what time frame that might have been or what type of analysis is going, but the numbers in here are really pretty solid, for a year.
Thank you.
When we talk about eventually renting the the square footage, are we talking about contributing any tenant improvements? Or is this, and if we are, where is that going to come from? Because that's imminent that we're going to get that done. So what's the plan?
There's absolutely tenant improvement costs, especially if you're dealing with restaurants. But you have to remember, this is an incomplete building. The Urban Renewal Agency has built this building, and so those tenant improvement costs are in the urban renewal budget.
How much are we estimating?
I'm a little hesitant to answer since I'm in the middle of negotiations with people, but we have a sufficient number, I think, to cover the tenant improvements. I can give an answer if you want, but honestly, I'd rather,
I'd rather,
Totally understand, yeah.
I'd rather work
No.
through that deal
Yeah.
privately.
I mean, it's one of the unique things, and, we're not commercial property owners negotiating leases all the time, and, so we're negotiating, and the last thing we want to do is show our cards, in a
Right.
sense, so.
Well, and the reason that I'm asking is when Sesame Donuts went in there, we paid $85,000 toward tenant improvements for them.
Was it that high back then,
Yes.
Tom? Yeah, I
It
don't
was,
remember.
I can
so.
tell you, yeah.
Yeah, I don't remember the number. We can certainly look
Look
it up,
that
but we
up,
had,
so.
we had bathroom improvements, we had HVAC improvements. That building was not nearly as complete as I think the Center for the Arts is. With that said, this is a much larger space, so.
All right. Last comments for community, or for community center.
I have a-
FTE I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Please, you started.
Just a recurring theme, what's your FTE?
It's around 3. So we have me, I'm the only 100% employee at the Center for the Arts. And we have pieces of 2 other full-time employees and then some part-time, 3 other full-time employees and then part-time employees.
Mr. Meyer.
Thank you.
Hi, Maggie.
Hi.
In looking at your goals for fiscal year 16, 17, you've got some exciting things coming up. And given our most recent history at the center, there's every reason to believe that this is a pretty conservative budget and revenue should likely exceed what's presented.
Yeah, that's my
So,
hope.
yeah, of course, that's all of our hope. So, having said that, have you had discussions about purchasing, and I say this in air quotes, typical rental equipment for the facility so that there's not as much of an impact on an annual basis to our budget? I mean, I'm thinking about goofy things like a copier. I mean, and I'm not saying you are renting or versus purchase, and I hate to even, you know what, strike that.
We have a
Strike that
copier.
from the record. So my question again is, has there been consideration to purchasing typical equipment? Pardon?
Like a stage.
Like a stage.
Oh, yeah.
Thank you.
Got a new stage on my stage this moment. We unpacked it this week. So,
excellent.
Yes.
Yeah.
We did some major fundraising this year, or the beginnings of major fundraising, and that fundraising is, we're hoping to continue that. There was the development of a new nonprofit fundraising arm for the Center for the Arts, and hopes to do annual fundraisers to help continue that fundraising and continuing the purchasing of equipment. We are taking steps towards outfitting the Center for the Arts to ensure that people who are coming in to rent the facility don't have to rent as much to use the facility. So that stage is one of those steps. We also were able to purchase a lift for visiting productions to not have to rent, sometimes upwards of $600 per production to do that, so.
Pipe and drape.
And a pipe and drape to cover the riser seats when somebody's doing a banquet.
nice.
Makes it
Looks
look
so much
fancier in there.
Yeah.
So we're just, after the first year, we're discovering the things that people really want
Yeah.
and really moving towards making sure that the center kind of fills that bill. So
And-
that we can continue this
Sorry, I'm gonna jump in
trend.
here. So future purchases of things like that are included in your budget. You're planning for that.
They are, and then they're also going to be dependent upon gifts from outside organizations and sponsorships.
And again, with the fee
fundraising.
schedule, you'll see some additions for stuff like that. We're trying to keep it very affordable and less expensive than if somebody was going to rent it someplace else. But you'll be able to come in and rent the pipe and drape and cover the back, or rent the lift instead of trying to bring it in and get it through the doors.
Great.
So the lift will be for use for, I apologize, for moving things in and out the back for sets and stage? things
Most
like that?
specifically for adjusting lights when you have a
Okay.
theatrical projection in there.
Yeah.
I have a group that's going to be using our old school lift to hang a drape for a production that's happening next weekend, and it's kind of a big deal. So this is going to be a really nice addition.
You will have to be certified.
Yes.
So it's not just a hop
Yeah,
on
didn't
and
someone
go.
get caught up there not too long ago?
Oh, yeah, it was a visiting production on a rented lift. It
Ah,
wasn't our
okay.
lift. It wasn't our lift.
I do
Counselor.
remember that.
Counselor Henderson.
Did we get the rest of the money you needed for the stage?
Yes, yeah,
So did we already pay you?
no.
Oh.
We have an
Do you have an
IOU.
invoice for
We
me?
have an IOU, sure.
Okay.
All right, anything else for community center?
SFA helped us. pay
Gorgeous.
for it.
So I do have one question. I noticed on your 2016, 2017 goals that you'll increase production and facility rentals at the center and improve infrastructure and policies to help support the expanded use for citywide value. So I'm wondering what that might be. Are you going to be going out and maybe soliciting things like business meetings usage, or maybe perhaps Red Cross trainings, things like that?
Yes, and you'll actually, if you notice on the budget detail, there is an increase in our marketing expenditures.
Yes, I saw that.
And that is a direct correlation to this goal. So making sure that we are using trade magazines, that we are
Perfect.
using outreach, and most specifically for our rentals. Clearly, that is our big revenue generator. So we're going to be working on creating great photography and making sure that we are marketing the space as a venue for events. And that includes professional events. Yeah, thank you.
And we're testing different ways of getting information to residents. So you've seen the nice glossy.
Very nice, by the way.
So
Thanks.
I know at one point we mailed that to everyone.
We'll be doing that in fall again.
And then we just tried to partner. Well, we did partner. We didn't try. We partnered with the Gazette and did an insert this time because those all go out, and it was actually saved a significant amount of postage by doing that. We didn't know if people would chuck it if they throw their Gazette
didn't
away
chuck it.
versus,
I
so there's
kept
always
it.
a question about getting the information and what will people retain and not just throw away. But that piece of material keeps improving. Whoever's doing that and your staff, it's a really
Yeah.
wonderful
Oh, nice.
piece.
That's really
And,
nice.
and we want it to go to people so they can see the range and the diversity of what's going on. Even if you don't use the center, knowing that it's getting used and what's being offered there, this goes back to when we talked about building this, it needs to be used.
Right.
If people don't think it's being used, they're going to say, why did we make the
Right.
investment?
And I can see a slick or some sort of advertising that would be directed towards specifically trade organizations or professional organizations that would look slightly different than what came in the Gazette.
Yep.
Yeah.
Since that was more arts oriented.
I agree.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Chair?
I think Ms. Klaus was first.
Just wondering, have you had any complaints on parking issues, or how are we doing parking-wise?
No, I haven't heard, I was prepared. I haven't heard a single complaint, not a single
Nothing
one.
from the adjoining residents? And
No.
nothing from the patrons?
Not a single one. And I go regularly to the Old Town meetings, and none of the businesses have said that they have issues on our big production nights. When we have sold-out productions in the center, we haven't had any issues with patrons having to come late or us having to hold the doors or anything. So I was really prepared for that, but it seems to be working so far, so, yeah.
Mr. Jensen.
So just kind of a general question. I don't recall, I wasn't involved when this was all being planned in that, but is there a long-term goal for how much the Sherwood Center for the Arts self-funds versus how much it's going to be funded by the city, by the budget?
Kristen, did we ever have a long-term goal that was discussed?
Well, I don't think there was one that was agreed upon. It depends on who you ask. There was some hopes and dreams that that this would eventually fund itself at 100%. That's extremely rare, if not impossible, with an arts facility. That's just not reality. And so at this point, you know, we'd love it if we're getting to 50% and then can do more fundraising. But it's a challenge, and across the state, across the nation, they don't pay for themselves, typically.
Which goes back
I wish
to
I had better news, but it's just
Yeah.
the truth.
Which goes back to the original idea, and I know it's frustrating to have the space empty, but once this lease space can be, hopefully have a successful business in there or businesses contributing to the center, that's going to be a positive. So I think the original idea that was developed to have that lease space in the long run is going to be a good decision. It's just taking a little longer than we'd prefer. But that won't cover the gap. I don't think this center is really going to break even anytime in the near future. But if we can get it very close or as close as possible, that would be a good thing.
I don't
And that
know
means
what-
being used.
Yeah, I don't know what you could, is there even a capacity to have enough events in there for it to break even? So I was just
That's a-
wondering,
actually-
did we figure long-term it's going to cost us X $100,000, $200,000 a year to fund this, and it's, it's something the community needs, and we realize it's going to be something we're going to have to pay for, and it's never going to fund itself, so.
It's a good way of actually looking at it, so.
And I
in
would
terms
say
of
it's
doing that.
possible we'd probably have to increase our fees because we are, though it's expensive to have an event in there, we are still trying to stay reasonable and within the market again. And it's expensive to have staff there and it's expensive to keep the building open. So we have a pretty low profit margin when we do have events. But that's something that we can play with down the road, and we're, like I said, we want to keep it marketable and open to everybody in the community and encourage people to come in. I think, we can work towards 60-70% would be would be fantastic if we got to that point, but
Councillor
we'll know
Henderson.
more in a few years, that's for sure.
Councillor Henderson.
So as you continue to market the center and grow the center, do you feel your current staff can meet the demands as the center grows? With the exception of maybe weekend events when you might, hire additional part-time people who work only on call?
I think that depends on how much of an interest there is to grow programming. So if we continue at kind of the program we have now with just a couple of series, a little gallery season that's really a community partnership, and focusing just on rentals, it's possible, in my opinion, that we might be able to stay where we are and just increase rentals. Although it's going to be difficult to be able to administer and maintain all those rentals. But if there is an interest in expanded programming, I think it's going to be hard with all the community events and outreach that happens to stay at this level of staffing. But I'm going to work my best.
And do you have a plan to, at some point, obviously we have a volunteer coordinator in the city, but a lot of theaters have a guild. And basically what guilds are is they're all volunteers. They come in, they usher, they work the event, which is volunteer time, but it also decreases the amount of staff time it takes. Trust me, I've broken down that center many times with staff. And,
you have.
and I think about if I don't stay here and help take down chairs and put up tables, that they'll be here just longer, or they come in earlier. And it's your center, but I think that might be something in the future that we have such a high level of volunteerism in Sherwood that, because what you do is you get to see a free show, essentially, while you work.
Yeah.
I
think with the development of this Friends of the Sherwood Center for the Arts Board, that is the hope, that's the role that this group will take, and continue to grow the Friends.
And many of the special events that we host or the center hosts, we do have volunteers come in and help on a regular basis and take tickets or service ushers.
Sell concessions.
It's when outside organizations come in and rent the space, we don't provide volunteers for that type of activity.
I want to be sensitive and respectful of time for tonight. We have a goal of getting through the public works, the rest of community services, and public comment, and we are about 40 minutes up. So if I could ask people's comments to be concise related to budget and spending too. I know we want to continue to work on things that are exciting in our community, but I want to make sure we move along too. Quick comment?
Yeah, a quick comment. So, what are we projecting realistically then for the next several budgets? We're about $200,000 that we're contributing toward, it's a deficit of $200,000, and eventually you say you hope to get about 50 or 60% of that covered. How many years down the road? I mean, realistically, are we planning $200,000 a year from are budgeting to contribute toward the arts?
You know, it's really hard to say. We are just a year in, so I'm not sure if the trend that I've seen over this 1 year is the fluke of the first year, or if it is truly projection of what is to come. So I certainly will probably be able to answer that next year. I know, as far as I'm concerned, my goal is to make sure that my program expenses are staying in line as close as possible to the revenue lines. So that's my personal goal. So hopefully within the next 2 years, we can make sure that those lines stay the same, that personnel services is maybe where we might be looking for the extra expense of
Okay.
coverage.
And then this doesn't count, like turning the lights on, turning the lights off. This is not involved in this budget, so we still have that expense, plus we have maintenance, right?
Correct.
Yes.
So this $200,000 that we're talking about is really, we have an added figure to that. That's just facility maintenance for the building being there in place, and that's carried through to another portion of the budget.
All right, thank you.
Thank you very much.
The next session is events and volunteers. So Kristen, can you remind folks?
So
what
events
this
and
is?
volunteers consist of events such as Music on the Green, Movies in the Park, Veterans Day, Community Services Fair, our volunteer and outreach type of program, Adopt a Road program, and a lot of those loose ends. The work that I do with Senior Center falls into this. Department 80 is kind of a catch-all for the rest of community services.
And the big decline in revenue is that we changed, so 4557, the facility use fees. We're not
Yeah.
budgeting or projecting for any of that, so that's
We
really.
broke out Department 81, which is on the next page. So 81 used to go into 80, and this is that recreation side of stuff, the sports side as well. So some of that fell into Field House and some of that fell into 80 before, and we decided we really wanted to be able to look at it by itself.
Any questions on events and volunteers?
About 1.5, and it really depends on where I end up charging my time. And then point 2 of Leah's time, Tammy falls under my department, and full-time in my department, but she charges her time across the board depending on which department she's assisting.
Thank you. Let's move on to the next section.
So Department 81, Recreation, Sports and Leagues. It's fairly new. We don't have a lot of history, so can you talk briefly about the revenue side first?
Yeah, the revenues predicted to stay fairly consistent, and this is the player fees, the fee that each individual who plays the sport pays. That comes back and helps us cover our costs, the player use fee, and then also the rentals, the outdoor rentals. So this is not in the field house, this is the outside rentals of the facilities and/or for the gyms.
So Snyder Park Soccer Field,
Yep.
for
Yep.
example,
Or gyms, yeah.
or gyms,
Yep. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
which are not city facilities, but yep.
Snyder's.
Yes.
We have an IGA, yeah.
I have a question.
Any revenue questions?
So the revenue is coming from, it's like you said, per player.
Mhm.
So if a family is involved with, say, Sherwood Youth Baseball,
Correct.
it's not actually a city sport,
Correct.
but their league pays you guys per player that's in the league.
Correct. So they collect $15 on our behalf. And then at the end of the season, we invoice them based on the number of players, residents and non-residents, because non-residents pay more that they have. And then that fee comes back to us, and that helps cover the cost of maintaining the fields and gyms.
Okay.
Mr. Klaus?
I just had a quick one on the professional and technical services, the $45,000. What that is?
That is for the recreation feasibility study. and that's for us to take a look at the current YMCA and what our options are moving forward with that facility.
And that's maximum, that's an RFP.
We're hoping that's max. Actually, we're hoping to come in less, but I wanted to make sure, based on research that Kristen did, that we had enough money budgeted to do that analysis. And that RFP is going to be going out anytime in the next couple weeks, so.
And that's what's causing the deficit, basically.
Correct, yes.
And the increase, the
That's
big increase.
Yeah.
That was my question. I was going to wait till expenditures. Councilor Henderson.
So we have an IGA with the school district to maintain sports fields, and now we have an IGA for the school district landscaping. Where is that money in Public Works? So the IGA payment that we get is in Craig's department for maintenance?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay.
All right. Any other questions on recreation in general? Move on.
All right.
Thank you.
So, Mr. Sheldon, why don't you come on up? We're going to talk about Department 98, correct?
No, it's actually 90, 91, 92.
So it's 90?
Yes.
So we're going out of
Before we
order.
actually get started, Joe, do we have enough time to get this
So
in
is this
public
general
comment?
fund?
37.
Okay.
This is general fund, page 37, and it's facilities.
Joe, Chair had a question.
Yes, I'm sorry. How many, well, let's.
We have two public
Two
comments.
public comments?
So that's 10 minutes. Now we have 3. 12 minutes.
It's hard to estimate how many questions we're going to get, so.
Let's see if we can limit the public works discussion to about 15 minutes. Allow for public comments. And then as time goes on,
Craig's okay with that.
Well, next week will be Craig's show because most of everything else is all enterprise funds, which
Okay.
are largely Craig's
so
area.
we have to
so
leave some things in public works this time for the next meeting. It's not.
It's not
Craig
the end of the
showing
world.
up for two
Yeah.
meetings.
And I think it's important to give enough time for folks to give their public comments.
I
so.
agree. I agree. All right, so let's try to keep this to about 15 minutes today, and then we'll pick up from there.
So what page are we starting on? Because
On
I,
page 37,
37.
yes. And it's 90, but all you see is the zeros of it. Page 37.
That's 90?
Sorry, on mine here with this. It's
Okay, that's weird.
It's formatting.
It's a formatting thing. Okay.
a
Oh,
formatting
I
thing.
see.
Yeah.
So Craig, why don't you go in and highlight some of the things that maybe stand out or jump out?
Okay. So the revenue in here, 4905 is Sesame Donuts, 18,500. Our staff moves around a little bit. It's allocation, so you're going to see a little increase there. We're not asking for any staff. Personnel cost. You will see under facilities, you'll see the 23 in 6182, 23,460. That's water for all the city facilities.
So that's a new item.
Yep.
What is it?
6182 under where it says water purchases, $23,000.
Is this where we weren't charging? Is this the-
Correct. So this
For
is the
facilities.
city starting to pay for water
Okay.
to the utility.
You'll
And that's
also-
for what facilities?
So that'll be for City Hall, the Arts Center, Public Works, and the police station.
I'm sorry, City Hall, Police Station,
Arts
Public.
Center.
Basically the buildings.
Okay, yeah.
And then another new charge will be 6212, 13,378. That's what our garbage cost for all these same facilities a year.
What number is that? I'm not.
13.
6213? No, I
You
should
said
have my
12.
glasses on. 13.
Yeah.
And then you'll get down into 6260. There's a big increase there. There's $80,000 this year for the YMCA Teen Center roof.
Oh, yeah.
In that, and there's a $8,000 variable frequency drive replacement here at City Hall that needs to be done. That's the difference there. And that's part of our asset plans.
Craig?
Yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
Is the roof work being done internally by your department, or
No,
is it
It'll be a
subcontracted?
RFP with the contractor doing the work.
Curious.
And we think we can do it for 80,000 once the roof comes off. We're hoping that that's what it covers.
It's a tear off?
Yeah, they'll remove it, so,
And it needs it.
yes.
What about the building? Doesn't the building need it as well, or are we doing that in
The actual ceiling of the building is part of the items that the city manager cut.
Okay.
We cut it back here earlier in the budget. It was for 45,000 to seal the teen center side. We went in and sealed the actual other part of the building a few years ago, and it was about a little over $100,000. We had to do some resealing. And this year, we asked for the 45,000 to seal the teen center side, since it's probably 12 years old. 2000, maybe a little older than that.
Try to get one more year out of it.
Yeah.
And I'm sorry, did you say under 6010 that the 40,000 increase was just step increases?
I would say it's either step increases and different allocation of staff time
Oh, okay.
going into parks. And then you'll see in 6519 increases, about 5,000. We've got paint stuff to stripe the parking lots at facilities this year. In 6701, the furniture is, Joe had talked about chairs in City Hall as well as the police station, since there's still people. That's part of the asset plan, using chairs that were purchased with the buildings. And then the $3,000 in next year is a replacement laptops for field work. And one thing that earlier in the budget, it's mentioned that Joe put in there about moving more time over into facilities. That also probably makes that personnel service. Last year, we asked for staff member for facilities. We brought on the art center, and really we have one staff member that's actually working in facilities, and they do all the setups of meetings and everything too. And we're adding more facilities. So what we did is we hired a parks person last year, and we're reallocating time and looking to bring somebody up as a lead worker in the facility side, and it'll be similar across the board in our department in every area. But it's not a new staff member, it's an existing time allocation.
Councilor Harris.
So I just want to clarify, because I missed a little bit of what you said. For the furniture, it was 12,000 last year and 11,000 this year. Is it both chairs, both years, or something else?
No, last year's, the 12,000 was for the new city attorney's office furniture.
Oh, got it, okay.
At that time, we didn't know, and then the city attorney has the city manager's old office staff, and the city manager went to a different style of desk, which was cheaper.
Oh, okay.
So this year, we'll give you that.
Cheaper.
But functional.
Yes.
Cheap but functional.
Other questions? Mr. Studer.
So I'm looking at 62, 62, 62, 63, and 62, 64, repair and maintenance. You've got those blanks on there. Is that, is there reasoning for that? I mean, if you don't keep stuff repaired, then you're buying new equipment.
Yeah, you will see that when we get to budget 92,
Okay.
the fleet side. So it used to be out of here.
Okay.
And last year we went to a fleet program and everything's moved over. So there's so much money from facilities into that
Okay.
fund.
Vice Chair Meyer.
I'm sorry, Craig, to ask the question again, but on the roof for the Y, how old is the roof on the Y?
It's probably, I think
Approximately.
the teen center was 2005, no,
So 11.
2004, something like that. And the warranty on that was up in 13 or 14.
So why a re-roof and not an overlay?
Well, it's a membrane roof. You
Oh, okay.
actually,
Yeah, okay, that's fair.
it's not like a roof on the house part of it. It's a
No, I
flat roof,
understand.
so,
I understand.
yeah.
Okay, same.
And it's leaking, correct, Renee?
Every week, I think this winter, we were up there several times.
All right, any questions? All right, let's move on.
So what's the next number?
91.
91. Okay. Parks maintenance.
You'll see in 4390 is what comes in from the school district for our maintenance. In recreation facilities, that's the rental of the park shelters. In miscellaneous revenue, we have nothing budgeted because that stuff moved over into the fleet side. It's our surplus equipment when we get rid of it. Again, no staff added here, just different allocations. You'll notice in 6182, that's irrigation for city parks only of 80,550.
So that's the duplicate, that's the new charge to the city to irrigate our parks.
Water, okay.
It's water.
You'll notice a big decrease in 6190, but some of it's a decrease and some of it actually went down into 6261. So that's why you have a decrease there. You'll notice a 6213 of 18,520. That's the garbage we take from the parks. Pride hauls off. And you'll see in 6261, there's an increase there. We have about $20,000 of brick repair over here. We've got our overseating top dressing in there. We've got the high school and infill at the high school, which we have about $15,000 there, and the school district will be paying for half of that. We're trying to get another year out of the turf at the high school, and this school district chose not to move forward with the replacement, so we're going to try to infill it to get it by for this next year. We also have some money in there to go in and infill the Snyder Park soccer field that we actually we installed new turf up there 2 years ago. It's time to go in and actually put a little more material in there, as well as the baseball field that was installed in the middle of 2006, I think is when it was installed. So there's some money in there, and then we have actually about 15,000 in there for trail maintenance. I think is what we've got in there. So there's a difference there. And that changes, a lot of that stuff comes out of our asset plans. Then you'll see rental equipment, that'll go down this year, might go down a little more depending on when the construction happens at Woodhaven Park, because we have a bathroom there now that'll come out, so we won't have that rental cost for the restroom there. And then there's a decrease in 6519, our operating materials and supplies from this last year. We built a dog park, and we thought it was going to come in at that, as well as some stuff over here at the cannery, so we reduced it by that amount this year, coming in a little bit lower. And then you'll see the 15,000 under 6704. That's replacement of half our laptops the field crew uses this year. And that's really the parks budget. Everything else is status quo. Those are the changes.
Questions? Councilor Henderson.
It's not really a maintenance question. I wanted to know what the cost of the dog park was.
I can get that for you.
When you go over capital?
You mean for the second dog park? There's money in the general construction for that.
No. What the dog park cost?
The existing dog
The
park.
current one.
You want to know what the maintenance cost is on that?
No,
Or
I
what it
wanted to
costs?
know what the park cost.
Construction
Total
costs.
Construction was about 118, I believe. I believe it was 118 to 122, something like that.
Other comments? Other questions?
We're going to do fleet? Fleet next.
Fleet?
Is that correct? 92?
Yes.
Yeah, so you'll see the revenues of the 4597 is surplus equipment that we'll be getting rid of this next year. Then each one of the 5,000s is money coming in from the enterprise funds for fleet maintenance. That's fuel, that's repair and maintenance, as Kurt had asked about repair and maintenance. So each one of those funds move money over, as well as any equipment we're purchasing. The salaries here, there was a little bit, I think last year it was really high because of allocation times, because I think however it worked out, I think there was some money that it was in the park side, so that was there, but I think we're right there. You'll notice the fuel cost is down this year, but fuel cost is not continuing to go down, so we put it back up to what we were paying here a couple years ago. And everything else, you've got a little increase there in 6470, and that's our WACA dues for our 800 radios. I think
The vehicle purchases?
those are big. Where we at? I don't have-
7650.
Oh, I gotta get on the right page here. 7650. So the chief talked about police cars. So we have an asset plan for our police cars, and you can almost, it's about 2 police cars a year, depending on the rotation. Most agencies are 5 years, roughly 5 years, 100,000. The cars that we're replacing right now are 2007 and a 2008. One of them's got, right now, has got a little over 90,000. They put anywhere between 20 and 25,000 miles a year on a car. So if you go next year at this time, they're getting new cars, you're running them to 110 to 100, depending on their rotation. And the 2008 that we're asking to replace has got over 80,000 right now. So by the time we replace them, even halfway through the year, they're going to be over 100,000 miles. So that's the 2 police cars that we're asking to replace. One of them is a patrol car, and the other one's the K9 unit. And then we have a replacement of a Ford Ranger out of the street fund. Then we have a replacement of another Ford Ranger, and it's paid for half out of storm and half out of water for that vehicle of $12,500 in each one of those, for a total of $25,000. And then as far as the capital equipment in 76, 79, we have a 48-inch mower that needs to be replaced, as well as our street sander, our 7-yard street sander, which comes out of the street fund that comes in here. It's almost completely rusted out on the inside, so that's about a $30,000 unit.
And that's one that you purchased, I apologize, Chair.
That's fine.
It's one that you purchased used too, isn't it?
Yeah, so
As I recall?
that unit actually come from Salt Lake City.
Yeah.
And we purchased it at the same time we purchased a dump truck, so. But a new sander is roughly to fit into the unit's about $30,000.
So Craig, is it safe to say the increase in the transfer, there's a pretty significant increase in the street fund?
It is for the small vehicle and.
Because of the vehicle and other things.
$30,000 sander.
Okay.
Chair.
Yes, Councilor Robertson.
So 2 police cars per year, how many cars total is that? Are we funding cars for every single patrolman, even though only 2 or 3 are on shift at one time?
So there's a rotation. You just don't have one car for one police officer. There's
Okay.
a rotation that's used. They have a court car.
Okay.
We take one out of service, they use that. They have their captains that's got vehicles. I don't have the exact number of police cars tonight with me, but they rotate them around, and we have it dialed in to get the most out of them to 7 to 8 years, so we're not paying, they just don't run one car to 60,000 miles and then they switch to another car. We worked with them, and they have a rotation plan put together that cars get rotated around. They go through, some of them go through like 6,000 miles, 3,000 miles in 4 weeks. Some of them, it all depends on what they're doing.
Okay, but
there's a
my
rotation.
question is, we don't have a car for every single
No,
patrolman.
Chief.
No,
Chief's shaking his head back there.
We have a certain amount of cars, and the officers share those cars.
Yes.
Depending on, okay, that's what I
Yes.
was worried about.
sorry, no, we don't have that many cars.
It just seems like a lot if you're doing 2 per year.
It is, but you're putting
Put a lot of mileage on those
20,000
cars.
miles on a car,
Okay.
20 to 25,000
Every
miles.
5
a year.
years, you get a new, you're replacing.
And we've stretched them out, so they're getting
What, 7 and
to
8, you said?
years.
Yeah.
So,
And I have a question too, Chair.
Councilor Kuiper.
And I just wanted to clarify all the transfer ins from the water fund and all these other enterprise funds. The way you calculate that is based on percent use of a vehicle is that how that works?
how we calculate that is in our system, maintenance management system. We have all our mechanics time, all our inventory, everything goes in there when they work on a vehicle. And then we know how much it cost out of each fund. We track that in our asset management system. So we know that if we got problems with the backhoe coming up, we know that we need to budget it through the funds that actually use that backhoe.
That makes
And
sense.
that's how we do it. But
I
our
just wanted
numbers
to
come right out
clarify
of
for
our
everyone.
maintenance system.
Okay, thank you.
System.
Other questions?
I have one.
Councilor Henderson was first.
The vehicles that are proposed to be purchases for the PD, is that cost fully equipped? Because I know there's a lot of
Yeah.
specialized
Depending on what the.
equipment and arrangement
Right.
that they do, right?
Yes, that's fully loaded with the actual, by the time you outfit one.
Okay.
That does not include the cost for the actual computerized units in them, though. So what that consists of is outfitting with sirens, lights, everything, and the car.
And then we do the,
Police
or
department.
IT or PD do their own install. Okay, thanks.
Counselor Harris.
So I'm just not super familiar with all of the fleet, but I know we have some more fancier big trucks and things and other more traditional looking police cars. Do you decide what you're purchasing
Well,
or?
we work with the police department, and there for quite a while, the police department was buying Crowns. We can't get Crowns anymore, so the Ford Explorer, the newer rigs they've got, and that's what patrol units are running all over the place, so that's what we're running too. There's a small difference in price between one car and another car. It's not a huge difference.
Well, I'm thinking like, I don't know what it is because I don't know enough about cars, sorry. But it's like there's like a big old white truck that you wouldn't know is necessarily a police car, like an undercover car, I don't know.
Right, so
something.
we work with the police department on what they need at the time, and then we try to work it in the budget.
Okay.
That's what it is. What you got right here is strictly patrol cars.
Want me to jump in?
Thank you, Chief. I don't want to speak for you, but
No,
there's a
that's
lot
fine.
of coordination that goes on between the fleet and PD.
So, the white truck, we needed a larger vehicle to serve as a command vehicle for response to incidents that happen out on patrol. And it needed to be able to carry a bunch of stuff in the back.
Oh, okay.
So we were originally going to buy a traditional command type vehicle. We came across that white truck, and it was basically on sale because it had been used by the vendor as a demo. So we were able to pick that up for probably $5,000 to $10,000 less than what we would have needed to budget for a traditional command vehicle like a Tahoe or something like that. So we took advantage of an opportunity. It looks a little bit outside the norm, but that's how we ended up with that truck.
Oh, got it.
With regard to the others, Craig was right. The Crown Vics were the traditional police cars. They quit making them, and they replaced it with a car that's much smaller on the inside. And so the option then at that point became the Dodge Charger or the Ford, the small Ford SUV. Okay. And we just found the SUV offers more space for the gear, the officer's gear and equipment. You have to remember that inside the center of the car is the MDT
Stuff,
mount.
yeah.
And that takes up a tremendous amount of room. And so to try to have enough room for the driver to fit comfortably, all sizes, we have to find a car that affords them that that comfort and that ergonomic ability. Otherwise, we're just dealing with complaints and back issues, and that is not what Tom wants to have to spend his time on, or Kelly. So that's how we came to those cars. And so
Okay.
you end up with a mix match anytime a dealer or manufacturer says, hey, we're not going to make this one anymore. And so
Yeah.
then you have to kind of transition through.
Well, and in my mildly ignorant mind, I have heard that you can get like cars from the different crimes that have been impounded, and so I didn't know if we got
Yeah,
some
seized
from that.
vehicles are-
And not so much our police cars specifically, but
We actually have one vehicle that
Oh,
came
that's
from
what
a
it's
drug
called.
seizure
yeah.
several years ago. But the federal government has changed that whole program significantly, so it's not anywhere near like it used to be.
I see.
You don't see those like you used to.
I'm going to close questions because we are running low on time and we need to respect the public comment period. So moving ahead in the agenda, I'm skipping over these any finishing questions for Public Works, and I'm skipping over the committee discussion and questions, and I'm going to move to the public comment section. I will now open the meeting up to accept public comment on the 2016-2017 City of Sherwood budget. If you wish to speak, please fill out one of the testimony forms and submit them to the Finance Administrative Assistant. The committee chair will recognize those persons wishing to speak, and any questions should be addressed through the committee chair. When you come to the microphone, please state your name and city of residence for the record, as this hearing will be recorded. Please speak clearly into the microphone. I have 3 public comments on record or on request right now. And the first public commenter is Nancy Taylor. Chair recognizes Nancy Taylor.
Nancy Taylor, Sherwood, Oregon, and I'm really going to make this very brief. This is my second time to come to these meetings, and I just want to make a comment. Out there in the real world, we're all struggling. normal increases in our budgets are not that big. And the one question I've heard none of you ask is, if you had to lower your budget, what would you cut? Everybody's asking, what more do you need? What more do you need? I'm not sure the city can actually afford that. I'm not sure the citizens in the city can afford that. The water cap measure passed. And it passed by a resounding amount. It was the 50% that we were looking for. So you have to think about these things, and that's the one thing I haven't heard anyone ask is, if you had to cut a budget, what would you cut?
Thank you very much. The next commenter is Susan Dans. Chair recognizes Susan Dans.
Hi, I'm Susan Dans. I am a resident of Sherwood. I addressed you last week, and I said that we would need to investigate the grant that was being proposed. And I want to say that I'm speaking as a citizen of Sherwood and a very active volunteer at the Robin Hood Festival, as well as the person who has been tasked to investigate grants. And in fact, I am taking the class that is very full, over full, as I understand, that our wonderful library is offering next week. And I'll be able to ask questions of the teacher about the grant. And as such, this week has been a very productive week, because right before the meeting, we investigated the Community Enhancement Grant, and we did learn right before the meeting, after asking questions and everyone working together, and yes, of course, what can be cut? You know, the Robin Hood Festival is designated to be cut from the city budget. In fact, I want to state that clearly for the record, for anyone who missed the last meeting, is that right now, the Robin Hood Festival is slated, the $10,000 that was requested is slated not to be allocated right now, just by the city as proposed, and that the grant, the Community Enhancement Grant, is being proposed as something to look into as an alternative, which is what we are doing. So we have determined eligibility for the grant. That's important. Because there were questions on that this week. But we also did determine that currently projects must be done between September 1st, 2016 and June 30th, 2017. Yes, we will apply, but I want to point out that the 2016 Robin Hood Festival is in July, which is before that, and the major summer event. And the 2017 summer event is after that. However, that doesn't mean that we can't be very actively looking for projects. What I want to also emphasize, and I would encourage the Budget Committee to examine the Community Enhancement Grant, is that there is a clause that talks about completing information indicating whether or not the project and/or sponsor have received community enhancement grant money in past years. And what I encourage there is simply to analyze that in terms of recurring projects. And of course, you know, groups can be creative in looking at different projects to propose. Now, just checking my time. Okay, got 1 minute. 1 minute, the value of the Robin Hood Festival to the city in terms of publicity. I'm going to say it really quick. This year, we have just, I've been told by our arts director anyway, she announced that we've been named around among 50 things to do in Portland in the summer. I have been contacted by Gannett. They're planning something. Last year, we had Joe on the Go, or no, last year was Kyle Mackey, which was really cool, and someone came to archery. We've had Joe on the Go. We actually volunteered a morning slot to our Voices of the Performing Arts, who do a major fundraiser every year at our event. Often we feature Sherwood Foundation for the Arts events at our event. We did have a role in Money Magazine being named, so there is tangible value to this festival. We are doing the mini float this year. What I would urge consideration is a balanced approach. This I also heard echoed There it is. Anyway, a balanced approach.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. The next comment, Chair recognizes Mr. Tony Bevel.
Good evening, Sherwood, Oregon, Southwest Lindley. I ask these questions because, for my own edification, because I'm really curious. I'm glad the police department are avid readers, because if you look at that page 27, line number 6506, books and periodicals increase from 250 to 1,000. So that's a big jump. I'm just curious about that. And then about library fines, it says the library collects $31,000 in fines. I'm glad that people are reading and maybe they're keeping the books a little long. Me too. Okay, but I always wait till December and do the food bank thing. So the 31,000, that's a little hard for me to understand. Then another thing that really, the field house, printing and ads for $4,000. That's 6430, page 30, $4,000. I mean, I haven't seen, not one word, not one picture or anything about the field house, which I think is great, but I haven't seen anything. So I'm wondering where that $4,000 is being spent. Then the the real curious one are bank fees, 6471 on all the different departments. I mean, most of the times people rob banks, but it looks like the bank's robbing the city, $47,600. I mean, come on. I mean, I do my banking. It doesn't cost me anything. So I think the city should investigate a bit about either finding a new bank or really putting the squeeze on the bank that we do have. Thank you.
Thank you. So we are very short on time tonight. I think if we started committee discussion and questions, it would go on much longer than needed. And I know that Craig is going to be back to finish up final questions on fleet, as well as the enterprise funds starting next week. I personally would like to remind those of us on the budget committee that if we're going to task the city staff to go back and give us more information and questions so that we can have actionable votes next week, tonight would be the night to do that. So I'd like to just glance around the room, and if anyone has things they'd like to have the city go and check out, rather than calling for an open discussion, just kind of glance around the room. If you have anything, raise your hand, and we'll mention that to the city. Start with Ms. Klaus.
Well, I also had a question about the bank fees. Is that just something you can answer very quickly? Because some of those funds says $8,000, $5,000, $2,000.
Credit card processing fees, that's what those are. is the
I'm
credit
sorry,
card-
what was that?
Credit card processing, for all
Oh,
of the
okay.
credit cards that we
I was
take
wondering
care
that
for
myself, so.
activity.
And it
And
has
then-
gone up.
Yes, and then
Okay.
of course there are bank fees in there also too, as far as just cash handling, all the processing of that. And when interest rates were higher, there was an analysis fee that you were able to earn on your money that would help offset those fees. The banks have basically eliminated those. So, it's gotten far more costly to run a business, so to speak, in that respect.
So there's no competition among banks for cities' business, which would bring down rates, anything like that?
There's very fierce competition amongst them, but as far as what the volume of cash is that the city moves through and the credit card processing that is done here, it's not an unusually high expense at all in relation to what other cities.
Certainly a frustrating expense, because it's been noticeable.
Yeah, I mean, it's 5,000 here, 8,000
It adds
there.
up.
I mean, it's in
That
every
you would,
department.
even though there is fierce competition, you would see this level of rates pretty standard. The problem also too, if I can just add one other thing, is that with the type of business that we do here, it's a very intricate type of banking. It's not just one thing. It's not just like your standard home banking.
Sure.
is.
Okay, thanks.
Anything else, Susan?
Well, I don't know when it's appropriate, but I would like to, when are we going to talk about the Robin Hood Festival? I mean,
I think it would be
association
appropriate
grant.
when we have a fairly large discussion time. So that agenda item was going to be C, the committee discussion and questions. It's going to
Next
be
week,
next week
then.
now. We're not going to have time for it tonight, but yeah, we will have that discussion.
Okay, because I'm ready to make a motion on that whenever we do it.
I think there may be some discussion.
There will be
before
discussion
a
on it, I'm
motion,
sure.
So.
Yeah. Okay, Councilor Robinson?
I would like to know from Joe how he came to the amount for an SRO not being included in the budget. I think you have a figure of 70-something thousand, or how'd you come up with that number, I guess is a question I wanted to know.
Councilor Browse?
Since I was late due to a conflict, I was wondering if there was a conversation about funding a code compliance officer at part-time.
There has not been yet.
Good to discuss. Mr. Jensen? Mr. Studer?
Nothing for me.
Councilor Henderson?
I'd also like to inquire about a part-time code that would come up, that would function out of planning. And then secondly, I'd like to know how the profit generated through court is allocated. If it's allocated any particular way other than it just goes into the general fund. And do we have another department that generates profit like that?
Not to that level.
Not to that level.
Vice Chair Mayor?
I'm going to pass at this time.
Okay. Ms. Kutzke? Councilor Kuiper?
I have a question here. I'm assuming that we have a half-time, part-time code complaints officers being funded now under the community development budget. Is that not correct?
It's just the current way we operate with code enforcement
Okay,
is the way it's being funded. And this year, it's all in the police department.
right.
Even though he does code enforcement and works with planning,
Mm-hmm.
we have proposed to fund it half and half.
Right, and so the question that Counselor Browse had was what?
I think they are interested in additional half-time
Oh,
code
okay, thank you.
enforcement
Okay,
that
Alright.
would be in planning.
yep,
Because the idea was going back to Councilor Treat, a full-time code position
Mhm.
in planning, and then the other position would stay in police.
okay, thank you. I have no other.
So I'm hearing an additional part-time that's in planning as an item for discussion.
Mayor Clark?
I don't have any additional questions.
Councilor Harris?
On that one, does that mean leaving the code enforcement officer full-time with the police, or having a full-time one here, just half with the current code and half with the new code?
If we added, and this is for further discussion, but if we added a part-time code officer in planning
Right.
that reports to Julia
Sure.
and does code enforcement and nothing else, the current person that does code enforcement would remain in the police department and just do police work.
Okay. It would
Evidence,
still
other
only
types
be a
of things.
half a person, it would just be
Correct.
a
Dedicated.
separate person.
Yes.
Okay.
Vice Chair Mayor?
I'm sorry, I did remember something I wanted to bring up. Of course. So on page 4 under the Reader's Guide, Joe, that you prepared for us.
Page what?
Page 4. Where you talk about the general fund, there is a line that talks about the general fund revenues are unrestricted in use. And in the appendix, in the glossary and acronyms, you identify what unrestricted revenue is, but I would like to see a definition of restricted revenue. And I think it would be helpful to the community to understand the difference and have a little bit more explanation of those funds.
Yes. You got that?
Our next meeting. And the last comment or request, Councilor Henderson.
Back to my request about court, is there anything that would disallow us or discourage us from having some of that money allocated for specific purposes within the general fund? No? Okay, thank you.
All right, we are a little over time. Thank you for your patience. The next meeting will be next week.
Next Thursday.
Next Thursday, the 26th at 6 p.m. We'll begin with finishing up the Public Works discussion. And I'm not sure if we should go straight into committee discussion or if we should go into a breakdown of the enterprise funds right away. I'm thinking it makes sense to go through the enterprise funds and then hold discussion.
Yeah, I think so.
Okay, so we'll pick up with Public Works, then go into the enterprise funds, then committee discussion.
Yep.
There will be public comment and there will be voting at the next meeting.
So what we will probably do, we hope we can wrap up next week. That is certainly, I think, everyone's goal. But we will probably do a poll. We've identified a couple dates in the following week. If we have to come back for a fourth meeting, we're going to probably poll folks in terms of who would be available. So we're looking at Tuesday, May 31st. This room is available on May 31st, so there's no conflict. The other option would be Thursday, June 2nd. This room is not available. We would probably want to do it at the community room at the police department if it's available. So we'll probably be polling members to see if we have to have a fourth meeting, which of those nights would work.
You said the 31st or June what?
June 2nd. Is it? Who's there?
The Arts Center might be open.
We'll look at other alternatives, so we haven't even looked at it. Okay,
One more question.
sure.
Because next week, I think we're going over the individual enterprise funds that include, is it not, the fee increases proposals? Right?
Yes, there are not a lot of fee increase
Okay.
proposals.
Because, it talks about, because changes to the SDC street fees, for example. So if that's what we're gonna be talking about next week, can you be prepared to answer and confirm that those fees meet the
What passed by the
what
voters?
passed the budget this week, or not the budget, which, the ballot measure?
So we can
that
begin to have
None
that.
of them exceed the 2% or are new, in other words.
Yes. We'll take a look at that.
Okay. So did we do that poll for?
No, we
Tuesday,
will.
May
I'll do it
31st?
electronically. I don't want to,
Electronic.
I don't want to do it now, so.
Okay. All right. The meeting is adjourned. Thank you very much.